Call the meeting order and welcome everybody to the March 2nd, 2026 council meeting. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councillor Blank. Councillor Dowd. Councillor Waterman.
Here.
Councillor Fisher.
Here.
Councillor Lefteridge.
Present.
Councillor Nunnally. Councillor Walker.
Here.
Councillor Gabrielle.
Here.
Mayor Hunter.
Here. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Mr. Lefteridge, will you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have our agenda before us. If look to council for a motion. Mr. Dowd, Mr. Dowd, you are.
Your Honor, I move the agenda is published.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gabriel. Motion and seconded. All those in favor, please state by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion carries. We have 6 items on the consent agenda. The first item being the council minutes from February 2nd and February 9th of this year. Second consent agenda item is Ward Engineering Contaminant PFAS Public Water Supply Wells 2026 project. This item considers awarding this project to Cold Water Drilling and Pump in the amount of $1,704,360, contingent on DEQ and funding agency approval. Third item is award stormwater decant and sweeping material facility project. This item considers awarding the base bid and alternates 1 through 3 to Jackson Contractor Group in the amount of $1,522,550 for this project. Item 4 is award Woodland Water Park Lazy River Repair and Resurfacing Project. This item considers awarding this project to Sunset Pools and Construction LLC in the amount of $239,305. Item number 5 is approved professional service agreement for a new central garage and new solid waste facility. This item considers selecting CWG Architecture as the professional consultant for these projects. Item 6 is to award a Type 1 ambulance build. This item considers awarding this build to Sawtooth Emergency Vehicles in the amount of $321,000. With that, I'll open it up to public comment on any item on the consent agenda. If you wish to provide public comment, please step to the mic and state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing no public comment, I'll look to council for a motion. Mr. Waterman.
Your Honor, I move the consent agenda as published.
Second.
Ms. Gabriel, second. Thank you. All those in favor state by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion carries. Next up is committee reports. We have none on the agenda, so I'll open it up to public comment for any items not on the agenda this evening. If anyone wishes to address the council on items not on the agenda, please step to the mic, state your name, or raise your hand if you're online.
Good evening, everybody. Nathan Dugan. I'm the executive director of Livable Flathead. Forgot the name of the organization there for a little bit. Our office is up at 121 Wisconsin Avenue in Whitefish. I think you all have a handout in front of you with a presentation, and might have dropped that in your email inbox as well, but I just want to kind of go over this really quickly. So we commissioned a poll of Flathead County voters performed by Embold Research, who's a nonpartisan public opinion research firm. I do have online the pollster. If there are any questions about this, he's going to leave kind of right after this, and I am too, because I'm trying to be in 2 places at once. But basically, so we had a survey of 615 registered voters in Flathead County. This happened like last week, so February 20th to 25th. 4% margin of error on that poll overall. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kalispell specific and some other age demographics and other demographics. And so the margin of error rises a little bit when we're talking about those because the sample size for those is a little bit smaller. But if we look at the sample that we had for Flathead County, pretty much what you would expect, I think. So 51% female, 49% male, less than 1% another identity, 28% Democrat, 60% Republican, 13% independent. Had a good spread of ages, about 25% in all of the age categories there, except for 65 plus, which was at 33%. Good mix of incomes. And most of our respondents, 329 of them, were actually here in Kalispell. So I put the sample overview for Kalispell in there as well. It's basically the same as Flathead County at large, so I'm not going to go over that. I do want to go over some of the key findings that we found here in the poll. So 7 in 10 voters here in Flathead County say that the county does not have enough housing options to meet the needs of all residents. And because of this, 45% of voters in the county do not see a long-term future here. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later. There's some pretty significant differences in like age and things like that. Voters overwhelmingly prioritize building more homes to reduce costs. So 64% chose that approach over protecting neighborhood character, which was down at 28%. 7 in 10 voters say that cities should prioritize redeveloping existing land within cities rather than developing open space outside of existing city limits. And so I think that everybody has kind of been feeling the sprawl that's been happening as we've been growing, and it seems pretty universal that people would prefer that not continue. And then a majority of voters, 54%, think that cities should allow up to 4 small homes per lot in all residential neighborhoods, except for the most rural areas on the edge of town. Getting into some of these results here, if you want to look at a write-up, I think I dropped a Medium post that I made into your inboxes as well, and that's got a lot more information on all of this stuff. Also happy to talk via email, but if we look at that first question, whether we have enough housing options to meet the needs of residents, we see that 67% of people say that we don't have enough, and that's pretty consistent. Columbia Falls and Whitefish are a little bit higher than Kalispell and the county. Go on to that next one. We have basically 80% of voters in the county have kind of been touched by housing on affordability and availability issues. In the county at large, 35% of people have been personally impacted, and another 45% have had a family member or a friend that's been impacted. And so it's a really widespread issue that is kind of touching everybody. Next slide on here, I'm not going to read these, but it's just, we had some open-ended questions. We got some pretty good quotes on there, just things that people are dealing with here, and good to read through when you get a chance. So this is the slide I was talking about earlier, where we're talking about due to the housing affordability issues and availability issues, we asked voters, has the availability of housing you can afford made it difficult for you to envision a long-term future in the Flathead Valley? Like I said, 45% of people answered that question yes in the county overall. If we break that down a little bit, we see that there's basically the younger you are, if you're a renter and the less income you make, you're significantly more concerned about that. So the 18 to 34-year-old age bracket, 78% answered yes. Renters were 76%, and people earning less than $50,000 a year were up at 63%. All right, just a couple more slides to go over here. We asked the question, when it comes to creating new housing in the Flathead Valley, what do you think cities should prioritize more? Creating more housing options that regular people can afford, or limiting the creation of new housing to protect neighborhood character. Countywide and in Kalispell, it's almost the same, 1 or 2 points difference. 64% of people said creating more housing options that regular people can afford, and in Kalispell that was 65 versus 28 limiting the creation of new housing and protect neighborhood character, and 26% in Kalispell. Next slide has like a bunch of different policies that we tested. I'll let you look at that kind of on your own. I already touched on the one of those there, and that is it. I think I got it in a few minutes. So cool. Didn't want to take too much of your time, but appreciate you listening to that. Happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions for Trenton the pollster, now would be the time because he's going to hop over to the meeting in Whitefish online here shortly. But yeah, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan.
Andy Estep, 742 14th Street East. I'm here tonight to ask you for some code clarification, assistance in navigating my small project to meet a need for some off-street parking at my house. I live on the east side in a 1940s home, and I'm doing my best to embrace and maintain some of the original design cues. As I was researching this and going through the informal information gathering and discussion processes with Public Works, I had to delve into the code. I was encouraged by portions like Chapter 27, which states encourage originality, flexibility, and innovation in site planning and development. Also discourage monotonous, drab, unsightly, dreary, and inharmonious developments, among other things. But I was discouraged when I got an answer back from Public Works Zoning that they would not approve my preferred proposal, which I had designed with many of these objectives in mind. Another applicable portion of the code reads, all off-street parking lots and associated areas shall be improved with asphalt, concrete, or comparable permanent hard surface. How many options do you infer that portion of code talks about? Asphalt, concrete, or something comparable? That's 3 or more. That wasn't the opinion of Public Works Zoning. That last option, number 3, doesn't exist. In fact, I got an email from them stating, and I quote, as far as comparable, we have yet to be presented with something that is. We don't accept permeable pavers, gravel, etc. That kind of blew my mind. The code says that there are 2 identifiable things plus a 3rd comparable option, but their current interpretation is that it's just the 2, in spite of the language of the code. If you were to wonder why there are only 2 types of monotonous, drab, unsightly, dreary, inharmonious parking surfaces in the city now, you know why. Because that's all that zoning would consider approving. It seems kind of antithetical to have 2 plus other options in the code, but in reality, that other option doesn't exist to me. Either the code was adopted to mean something about other appropriate options, or it should be changed to match the council's intent. Overall, I just wanted to make you aware of the inconsistency in my experience to date, and also ask if council's intent is in fact to require that residential parking lots can only be paved. I would also appreciate any kind of feedback from you or from staff as to why I can't explore and permit the alternative options for my projects. Thank you for your time. My clerk has your clerk has my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, seeing no further public comment, I'll close public comment and move on to reports, recommendations, and council action. First item on the agenda is Resolution 6311, Bloomstone Apartments Preliminary Plat. This resolution considers major subdivision preliminary plat approval for 3 multifamily lots on 11.911 acres located at 1145 Tree Line Road. Mr. Nygren, staff report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I'll turn it over to Donnie McMeth, our Planner 2 for a staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. Donnie McBath, Planner 2. The item before City Council this evening is a request for major preliminary plat approval for the Bloomstone Apartments application KPP 25-06. The proposal would subdivide approximately 11.91 acres into 3 multifamily lots to facilitate development of the the approved Bloomstone Apartments project. The subject property is zoned R4 residential with an approved planned unit development PUD overlay. Development of this site is governed by the approved Bloomstone PUD, the Kalispell subdivision regulations, and applicable provisions of the Kalispell zoning ordinance. This request does not reopen questions of land use, density, or entitlement, which were established at the time of PUD approval. City Council's review this evening is to determine whether the preliminary plat complies with the approved PUD framework, the Kalispell subdivision regulations, and the applicable provisions of the Kalispell zoning ordinance. Municipal services and public infrastructure are available to serve the site and were previously evaluated as part of the approved Bloomstone development. The Bloomstone Apartments preliminary plat proposes subdivisions of approximately 11.91 acres into 3 multifamily lots to facilitate development of the approved Bloomstone Apartments project. The subject property is zoned R4 residential with a planned unit development overlay, and the development is governed by the approved Bloomstone PUD. The request does not introduce new housing types, does not increase density, and does not modify the development standards previously approved as part of the Bloomstone PUD. The preliminary plat implements the approved development framework and does not create new land use entitlements. Review is limited to compliance with the subdivision regulations, applicable zoning provisions, and approved PUD. The subject property is located entirely within the city of Kalispell and within the West Kalispell urban service area. The site lies within the boundaries of the approved Bloomstone planned unit development and is intended for a multifamily residential development consistent with the approval. The property is surrounded by previously approved portions of the Bloomstone development and is served by established or approved public infrastructure, including streets, utilities, and emergency access. The proposed preliminary plat does not introduce development into a new or undeveloped area, but instead continues implementation of an approved development framework. The subject property is zoned R4 residential apartment and is subject to the approved Bloomstone planned unit development. The Bloomstone PUD establishes the overall land use framework, residential density, circulation pattern, and development standards for the site. This preliminary plat is reviewed solely for the compliance with the approved PUD, the Kalispell subdivision regulations, and the applicable provisions of the Kalispell zoning ordinance. The request does not modify zoning, density, or permitted uses, and no amendments to the approved PUD are proposed. The Kalispell Growth Policy Planet 2035 designates the Bloomstone site as high-density residential, which is intended to accommodate multifamily residential development at urban densities within areas served by full municipal services. The Bloomstone planned unit development was previously approved consistent with this designation. The current preliminary plat does not increase the approved density, alter land use assumptions, or modify the development framework established by the approved PUD. The proposal continues implementation of the Bloomstone development within the city's established urban service area and is consistent with the adopted growth policy. Based on the materials submitted within the application, the Bloomstone Apartments site is not located within the FEMA-designated 100-year floodplain and contains no map wetlands, surface areas, or riparian corridors within the preliminary plat boundary. The site has been previously disturbed through the earlier phases of the Bloomstone development, and no environmentally sensitive features are present within the area proposed for the subdivision. Standard erosion and sediment control measures will be required during construction and will be reviewed and approved through the city's engineering and building permit processes. No environmental constraints have been identified that would preclude subdivision of the property or development consistent with the approved Bloomstone planned unit development. A geotechnical investigation for the Bloomstone Apartments was previously prepared and has been supplemented by a geotechnical validation memorandum dated December 16th, 2025, which confirms that the original findings and recommendations remain applicable to this preliminary plat. The submitted geotechnical information indicates that the site's soils and subsurface conditions are suitable for the multifamily residential development when construction occurs in accordance with report recommendations. Final grading, foundation design, and site-specific construction measures will be reviewed and approved through the city's engineering and building permit process. All development within the plat area will be required to comply with the approved geotechnical recommendations. Municipal services for the Bloomstone Apartments were evaluated and approved through the original planned unit development process. This preliminary plat does not modify service demands or infrastructure assumptions and relies on the same public service capacity previously approved. All infrastructure improvements will continue to be reviewed through the city's engineering and building permit process. Traffic impacts associated with the Bloomstone Apartments were previously evaluated through approved traffic studies for the overall Bloomstone PUD. This preliminary plat does not introduce new external access points and relies on the internal public street network previously approved and constructed as part of the PUD. The proposal does not alter traffic volumes, circulation patterns, or mitigation assumptions established through prior approvals. Any site-specific circulation or access details will be reviewed during final engineering, consistent with the approved PUD and applicable city standards prior to the final plat. All noise mitigation measures required to reduce exterior sound levels to 60 decibels shall be installed as detailed in the submitted noise study in accordance with section 28.3.09 of the Kalispell subdivision regulations. Parkland dedication requirements for the Bloomstone development were addressed and satisfied at the PUD development approval stage, where the overall parkland obligation for the project was evaluated and approved. The proposed preliminary plat for Bloomstone Apartments does not create new residential entitlements or increase the approved unit count, and therefore does not generate additional parkland dedication requirements beyond those already addressed. Open space areas and stormwater management tracts within this phase will remain in private ownership and will be maintained by the Bloomstone Homeowners Association in accordance with the approved PUD and recorded governing documents. Any required maintenance responsibilities and associated waivers will be documented and recorded at the time of final plat to ensure long-term private maintenance of these facilities. Based upon the record and the findings contained in staff report KPP 2506, staff recommends that City Council adopt the staff report as finding in fact and approve the preliminary plat for Bloomstone Apartments, subject to the listed conditions of approval. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? I just have one regarding, so with 382, the PUD previously came before us, that would continue to, and similar project come before us, but this being a preliminary plat, this part of it would not come before us in the future under the new rules of 382, correct?
Right, so the PUD portion, because that's part of the zoning regulations and map that's on there, would come in front. Something like this, where there's already a PUD and you're not modifying the PUD, then it would go through whatever procedures are outlined in 382, wherever that settles.
And that takes effect May 1, or does it take effect once we adopt the growth plan, or once we adopt the growth plan zoning and subdivision regs?
Well, once we're fully under that, so as part of the adoption process under 382, we've got the land use plan. And then that sets the stage because the land use plan is kind of the guiding document for establishing your regulations. Once you adopt the land use plan, then you would update the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations, and that's when that new procedure would take effect. But we need to be under that by, I believe, May 17th.
17th. Okay. Great. Thank you. I'll open this item up to public comment. If you wish to speak on this item on the agenda, please step to the mic, state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing no public comment, I'll look to the council for a motion. Mr. Waterman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move resolution number 6311, a resolution conditionally approving the preliminary plat of Bloomstone Apartments described as Lot A, Block 1 of Bloomstone Phases 5 and 6, according to the map or plot thereof on file and of record in the office of the Clerk and Recorder of Flathead County, Montana.
Second.
Mr. Fisher, seconded. Thank you. Discussion on the item.
I think that it was really important that we note that, this is part of what would be changing with the process. But then I also would note that, this is really getting into the type of spaces that we're talking about, more dense use within town. So it looks like a good project in that sense moving forward, and happy to support it.
Do we have anyone joined us online?
No.
No. Okay. Roll call vote.
Counselor Waterman,
Yes.
Counselor Dowd,
Aye.
Counselor Fisher,
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge,
Aye.
Counselor Walker,
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle,
Aye.
Mayor Johnson, or Mayor Hunter. I'm sorry, it's so automatic.
Might be a few years, I
11
understand.
years.
Aye. Motion carries. Second item on the agenda is Resolution 6312, Starling Phase 5 and 6 Preliminary Plat. This resolution considers major subdivision preliminary plat approval for 54 residential lots on 12.55 acres west of Stillwater Road between 4 Mile Drive and Old Reserve Drive. Mr. Nygren, staff report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, once again, I'll turn it over to Donnie McBeth for a staff report.
Good evening, thank you again, City Council Mayor, Donnie McBeth, Planner 2. The next item before City Council this evening is a request for a major preliminary plat approval for Starling subdivision phases 5 and 6, application KPP 25-07. The subject property is located entirely within the city of Kalispell and is part of a previously approved Starling plan unit development. The overall land use framework, zoning, density, circulation pattern, and development standards for the Starling subdivision were established through prior approvals and not being reconsidered as part of this request. City Council's review this evening is to determine whether the proposed preliminary plat complies with the approved Starling PUD, the Kalispell subdivision regulations, and the applicable city standards, including infrastructure, access, and subdivision design requirements. The request is a approval of the Starling subdivision phases 5 and 6, which represent the next phases of an already approved Starling plan unit development. The site is located west of Stillwater Road between 4 Mile Drive and Old Reserve Drive, entirely within the city of Kalispell, and within the city's established urban service area. Access is provided through extensions of Timber Wolf Parkway and August Way, consistent with previously approved Starling phases. The preliminary plat proposes a subdivision of approximately 12.55 acres into 54 family single residential lots, together with associated public streets, utilities, sidewalks, and common open space. This proposal represents an incremental continuation of the Starling subdivision framework and has been approved and developed in earlier phases. No zoning changes, conditional uses, or deviations are requested beyond what has previously been approved under the Starling PUD. The subject property is located within the city of Kalispell and is part of the previously approved Starling subdivision. The site is surrounded by earlier phases of the Starling development and is located within an established urban residential area with existing public infrastructure and municipal services. Development of phases 5 and 6 represent a continuation of the approved subdivision pattern and does not extend development beyond areas previously reviewed and approved by the city. This slide provides context for how Starling subdivision 5 and 6 fit within the approved plan unit development. The map on the right shows the broader Starling subdivision, illustrating how phases 5 and 6 relate to the overall PUD layout, internal street network, and surrounding phases. The map on the left focuses specifically on phases 5 and 6, showing the preliminary plat boundaries, lot configuration, and infrastructure associated with the request. Together, these exhibits confirm that the proposal of continuation of the approved PUD framework, with no new access points, circulation changes, or land use entitlements. The subject property is zoned RA1 residential apartment with an approved PUD overlay. Development of the site is governed by the Kalispell subdivision regulations, applicable provisions of the Kalispell zoning ordinance, and approved Starling PUD. The approved PUD establishes the overall land use framework, development standards, circulation pattern, and infrastructure obligations for the subdivision and allows residential development to occur in a coordinated, phased manner. This application does not request any zoning changes, conditional uses, variances, or deviations from the approved PUD standards. The proposed subdivision layout is consistent with the zoning designation and implements the development framework previously approved for the Starling PUD. The growth policy designates the subject property urban residential. The urban residential designation is intended to accommodate moderate to higher density residential development within the city's established urban service area and to be supported by full municipal services, including public water, sewer, streets, sidewalks, and emergency services. At 54 lots on approximately 12.55 acres, the proposal results in a gross residential density of approximately 4.3 dwelling units per acre, which is consistent with the urban residential designation, and well below the maximum density anticipated by the growth policy. Based on the proposed density, subdivision layout, and availability of public infrastructure, staff finds the proposal consistent with Planet 2035, particularly policies that support compact urban growth, efficient uses of infrastructure, and coordinated neighborhood development. Based on the material submitted, the subject property is not located within the FEMA designated 100-year floodplain and contains no mapped wetlands or surface waters within the subdivision boundary. No environmental sensitive areas or riparian corridors are impacted by the proposed preliminary plat. Standard erosion and sediment control measures will be required during construction and will be reviewed and approved through the city's engineering process. Based on this review, no environmental constraints have been identified that would preclude subdivision or development of the site. A geotechnical investigation was previously prepared for the Starling subdivision and supplemented by a geotechnical validation memorandum dated December 16, 2025, confirming the original recommendations remain appropriate for this phase of development. The analysis indicates that the site's soils and subsurface conditions are suitable for residential development when construction is completed in accordance with the geotechnical recommendations. Final grading, foundation design, and any site-specific construction measures will be reviewed and approved through the city's engineering review and building permit processes to ensure compliance with the city's standards and geotechnical requirements. Municipal water and sanitary sewer service will be provided by the city of Kalispell. Fire protection, police services, and solid waste collection are also provided by the city and were evaluated as part of the original subdivision and PUD approvals. Public infrastructure for phases 5 and 6 will be designed and constructed in accordance with the city standards and will be reviewed and approved through the city's engineering review processes prior to final plat and building permit issuance. Continuation of public services for this phase is consistent with previously approved service capacity assumptions, and no service capacity constraints have been identified that would preclude development of this proposed subdivision. Traffic impacts associated with the Starling subdivision were evaluated through previously approved traffic studies, including updates that account for continued build-out of the development. Phases 5 and 6 rely on internal public street network that has already been approved and is partially constructed. No new external access points are proposed with this phase. The proposed preliminary plat does not alter traffic volumes, circulation patterns, or mitigation assumptions relied upon in earlier approvals. Any site-specific circulation, access geometry, or operation details will be reviewed and approved through the final engineer review process, consistent with city standards. Parkland dedication requirement for the Starling subdivision were addressed and satisfied at the plan unit development approval level, where parkland common open space and recreational amenities were evaluated as part of the overall development plan. Final verification that parkland requirements are met for the Starling phases 5 and 6 will occur prior to final plat approval, consistent with the approved PUD and Kalispell subdivision regulations. Common open space areas and stormwater management tracts within the subdivision will be privately owned and maintained by the Starling Homeowners Association. Required maintenance district waivers will be recorded on the final plat to ensure long-term maintenance in the event of a HOA default. Based upon the record and findings contained in staff report KPP 25-07, staff recommends that City Council adopt the staff reports as finding of fact and approve the preliminary plat for the Starling subdivision phases 5 and 6, subject to the listed conditions of approval. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions from staff? Mr. Waterman?
Is there a future park that's to the west of this that's proposed?
Let me pull up the map here.
The reason I had the question was this couple slides before there, you had a little green area, but next.
Oh, the green area?
Yeah, it's public.
Yeah, the multi-use,
This right here?
yeah, to the left.
To the left.
That's the
City
stormwater
multi-use
facility.
facility, that's the future use facility, or? Yeah, that one.
Yeah, the area that's indicated over there, that's that stormwater facility that would have some of the adult fields, which isn't directly related to what they're
Isn't
doing here,
directly-
but it's tied
so
into it.
there wouldn't be any connectivity from this subdivision into a future.
Not directly from here, but there's a number of other phases that they're looking at. So they did their PUD through phases 1 through 8, but there's a lot of other conceptual phases that are out there that may well run over to that area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as it goes on, and it's not determined what the fields will be yet, but they are graded there. But yes, the The development will go all the way up to it. There's actually an agreement with the developer that as phases go on, actually cash in lieu from the development can go into that facility there for
right.
future improvements.
Thank you. Thank you for your clarification.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll look to public comment. Anyone wishing to address the council on this agenda item, please step to the mic, state your name, or raise your hand if you're online.
Good evening, council. Eric Mulcahy with Sand Surveying, 2 Village Loop. The developers are here with me tonight. We've read through the staff report and the conditions, and we're happy with all of those, and we'll make those work. If you have any questions for me or the owners of the project, we'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Okay, I'll close public comment and look to council for a motion. Ms. Gabriel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would move resolution number 6312, a resolution conditionally approving the preliminary plat of Starling subdivision phases 5 and 6, described as a tract of land lying in the south half of the northeast quarter and in the northeast quarter of the southeast quarter of section 35, Township 29 North, Range 22 West, PMM, Flathead County, Montana, and as more particularly described in Exhibit A.
Mr. Walker, second. Thank you. Discussion on this item.
What year did we start this?
I believe 2006.
Yeah, it's been a while. Okay.
Takes a while. Sure. Any other discussion? Look for a roll call vote.
Counselor Dowd,
Aye.
Counselor Waterman,
Aye.
Counselor Fisher,
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge,
Aye.
Counselor Walker,
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle,
Aye.
and Mayor Hunter.
Aye. Motion carries. Third item on the agenda is Bloomstone Townhomes final plat. This item considers final plat approval for a 7.6 acre subdivision with 42 townhome lots on the north side of 4 Mile Drive between Highway 93 bypass and Kidsport. Mr. Nygren, staff report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I'll turn it over to PJ Sorensen for a staff report.
All right, thank you, Mayor Council. Kalispell National Multifamily LLC has submitted a request for final plat approval of Bloomstone Townhomes, which is formerly Bloomstone Phase 4A. This subdivision contains approximately 7.6 acres, including 42 townhouse lots and common area. We just looked at the apartments, which are right in this area through here. The townhomes that we're looking at in this particular subphase are kind of right here in the middle. There'd be a Phase 4B to the south of that, just kind of right off of 4 Mile Drive, and then some future projects that would be coming in more to the north. City Council approved the preliminary plat with 40 conditions on July 1st, 2024. All of the conditions have been met or adequately addressed. As shown the upper portion of that phase and the southern portion of that phase. All infrastructure has been installed and accepted or bonded for. There's a subdivision improvement agreement in the amount of $636,241.87 secured by cash, which is included for the council's consideration. With that, staff would recommend that the City Council approve the final plat for Bloomstone Townhomes as well as the subdivision improvement agreement, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for staff? I just had a question. This is the area, and I know it's for the apartments we just approved as well, but all the earthwork that's been happening on the site, correct? Mm-hmm. There's been quite a bit of movement of soil. We've had all the inspections in terms of the stability of that and the on the foundation, you know, the soil,
Yeah.
I guess. And
So in terms of, soil stability and geotech, there'd be two different things that are going on. And because there's multiple projects, it's kind of hard sometimes to separate some of those out. With those apartments, they've got building permits for the initial buildings they're putting in. As a commercial building, that's part of the building permit process where they get geotech. And there were geotech reports filed as part of the platting process, the initial platting process with that. similar on the, with these townhomes, individual, like, single-family homes don't get geotech, but that's part of the subdivision process that comes in, and that's looked at with the grading plans that Public Works would look as part of the engineering review. They're going to want to make sure that all the infrastructure is on stable ground, in addition to whatever construction may happen there. So, yes.
So all the geotech came out, checked out.
Yep.
I didn't look too closely at that, but yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll open this item up for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on this agenda item, please step to the mic, state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing none, I'll look to council for a motion. Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move that we approve the final plat for Bloomstone Townhomes as well as the subdivision improvement agreement.
Second.
Mr. Fisher, second, thank you. And discussion on the item.
Again, as you said, there's been a lot of earth moving on this area. What I guess I most agree with and are happy that we've done, the past council has addressed some of the 4-mile issues to make sure that there's pedestrian access is there. So supportive of the project moving forward, knowing how much work it has done.
Yeah, and all that earth movement, we're very reliant on those geotech reports and checking that out. Yeah, move forward with it. Roll call vote.
Counselor Dowd?
Aye.
Counselor Waterman?
Aye.
Counselor Fisher?
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge?
Aye.
Counselor Walker?
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle?
Aye.
Mayor Johnson? Mayor Hunter?
Aye.
Off tonight. Sorry.
That's right. Motion carries. Fourth item on the agenda is Resolution 6313, intent to hold public hearing for Kalispell Land Use Plan, Planet 2045. This resolution provides notice of the intention to adopt with revisions, or reject this proposed plan and hold a public hearing for public comment on March 16th, 2026. Mr. Nygren.
Yes, Mayor and Council, thank you for getting my name right there. Pretty common practice here. Anytime we're dealing with a land use plan in a public hearing, we schedule a notice of intent to hold a public hearing and then a public hearing at which time the council consider taking action on it. It doesn't obligate the council to adopt anything in the future, but it does set the process forward for holding a public hearing on the land use plan, which we are also currently working on. But knowing the timeline ahead, just needed to get this process going because there is a bit of time before we'd actually be able to hold a public hearing with the comment on the proposed plans. So that's what you have before you. Like I said, all this does is set the hearing on the actual plan for March 16th, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? And so if we have if we did need that 16th for one last discussion of it, that's still okay in terms of timing with a public hearing on the same?
Yeah, I
same
mean,
meeting?
certainly the council can hold the public hearing, and then if weren't ready to act on it, you could always postpone it or what may be. I will add that the reason we're kind of putting this date forward too is we still have zoning regulations and subdivision regulations that the council is going to need to consider. So in order to have all that adopted by that May 17th date, we've got a pretty tight schedule here. So.
And just to add to that too, the 16th would be just for the public hearing on that. The actual action date would be in April, first meeting in April. So.
Oh, okay.
And that's when council discussion would be in on the final vote on it, so.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that clarification.
That's right, yeah, we intended not to take action in the public hearing on the same night, because certainly public comment could alter any decisions on that, so.
Yeah, okay. Right, open this item for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the council on this agenda item, please step to the mic, state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing none, I'll close public comment and look to council for a motion. Mr. Dowd.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move resolution number 6313, a resolution of intent to adopt with revisions or reject the proposed Kalispell Land Use Plan, Planet 2045, calling for a public hearing and directing the city clerk to provide notice thereof.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gabriel. Second, open for discussion. Mr. Water.
We definitely have a lot of time to still have a lot of discussion about things, and even this resolution gives some clarity that, we have adopt with revisions, or reject. I mean, there's still a lot of decision-making, but it is important to get the public comment into this, so I'm looking forward to getting us moving forward, given how many more meetings we have about the subject.
Mr. Dowd.
Yeah, I just, if the public is not aware, we have had months of staff input on this document, and I don't know how many hours that the council has deliberated over what they provided to us, but it's been quite a bit. So our silence up here is just because we've been inundated with this for months. And, if there's any questions, please reach out to your council member.
All right, great. Get a roll call vote.
Counselor Dowd,
Aye.
Counselor Waterman,
Aye.
Counselor Fisher,
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge,
Aye.
Counselor Walker,
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle,
Aye.
Mayor Hunter.
Aye. Motion carries. Fifth item on the agenda is Resolution 6314, Support for Montana Resiliency Fund Grant Application. This resolution considers supporting the submission of a grant application for a public safety building backup generator hazard mitigation project. Mr. Nygren.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I'll turn it over to Nelson Loring, our Community Development Manager, for a staff report.
Hello, Mayor Council. The Montana Disaster Emergency Services, they published a notice of funding opportunity, about $3.8 million. This is state funding, it's not federal. And so we are looking to apply for a backup generator for the public safety building that houses the police department and a fire station. The project would consist of the purchase of the backup generator, installing it, and also running conduit to the evidence building so that when there is a power outage, the evidence building has backup power. The grant application is due March 6th. If awarded, it would be administered by the Community Development Department. The application, the award limit is $300,000 due to the number of communities that submitted a letter of interest. About 64 communities wrote in a letter of interest, so the cap is $300,000. An award, the match requirement is 25%, the city, 75%, the state. Currently, the budget is not completely finalized, but is estimated to be about $380,000. And so if we are selected for the award through the grant agreement process, we would finalize that with the state. And so essentially how it would work is we would put it out to bid and choose the best and most cost-effective partner for the project. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Mayor and Council, I want to jump in here as well, because this is something that hasn't been talked a lot about. It wasn't talked about at the last budget. However, during the last wind event, it came pretty apparent that, with the power outage, our public safety building did not have power for quite some time. And we do have evidence there. There's a lot of reasons. Obviously, the fire department during an emergency situation should have adequate power. But this grant opportunity came about right after that. It will require a match. The match, there is kind of funding available within both the police and fire budgets. It has not been particularly identified as this, but certainly the window here is pretty small to apply for the grant. It doesn't obligate us to it if we were awarded, but certainly if we're lucky enough to be awarded, I'll be coming back to the council to discuss options on the matching portion of that, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff, Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Your Honor. That was my question. Police and fire would be our 25%. With leftover funds at the end of the year that would be identified? Is that what you're looking at?
Potentially, but it's also possible that this may not be awarded until next fiscal year. So we may also, depending on the timing of that, be able to incorporate it into the next fiscal year as well.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Dowd.
Is this piece of equipment high dollar enough to use impact fees for our match portion?
It's not growth related, so no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Leffridge.
During the last wind event, how long was the power out?
I think at the public safety building, we were pushing 2 days without power, yeah.
Mr. Waterman.
So currently, we don't have any generator over there right now, or is it just that it's not
We-
adequate for the
It's,
additions that we've
it's
done over there?
not adequate. It's kind of adequate for limited servers and things like that, but not to power the entire facility.
But that's because of some of the expansion that we've had into what was the old Parks and Rec area.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but the building itself, you know, we got barracks and things like that that were out, so.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
Did we have any evidence damaged or anything as a result of that, or?
We didn't. We had, it wasn't a long enough time. Just more concerning of bringing it to our attention if we weren't to get power back. And there's a significant amount of cases that could be impacted by that.
Sounds like we got lucky.
All right, open this item up for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the council on this item, please step to the mic, state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Okay, seeing none, close public comment and look to council for a motion. Mr. Waterman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move resolution number 6314, a resolution of support for the submission of an application to the Montana Disaster and Emergency Services Resiliency Fund grant to fund the purchase of and installation of a permanent backup generator for the City of Kalispell Public Safety Building.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for a second. Discussion from council. Mr. Dowd.
Yeah, I actually have a go back for the staff here. It sounds like, just preliminary swag at the number is about 150K from our budget that would go into this.
Too preliminary. I don't think it'll be, the max is 300,000. 20% of that is what, 80,000? And
Yeah,
that's
plus
about,
it was
that's
another-
about, that's about the budget from what we're projecting. So we're on the total cost of it will be about with 380,000, we're guessing somewhere in there. So the match will be pretty much line up with that. So
And because of the time frame, either this year or next year, it would have to be in this year's budget that we're gonna go through in springtime, right?
not necessarily. I mean, if they don't award it till summer, fall, we'll be talking about it during budget season for next fiscal budget.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion? I'm gonna
Seems like a
say,
good
yeah,
idea.
it seems an important item, definitely something we want to get in place, so, roll call vote.
Counselor Dowd,
Aye.
Counselor Waterman,
Aye.
Counselor Fisher,
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge,
Aye.
Counselor Walker,
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle,
Aye.
Mayor Hunter.
Aye, motion carries. Sixth item on the agenda is Resolution 6315, Water System Revenue Bonds for Water Storage Replacement Tank Number 2. This resolution considers issuance of a $6 million in bonds from DNRC with forgiveness of $3 million with satisfaction of certain conditions. Mr. Nagin, staff report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, pretty routine resolution in regards to what is an SRF loan for our water system for $6 million. Thankfully, it also does include $3 million in forgiveness as long as we meet the conditions. Really not much more to report on that, but it is for the Tank 2 project, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from staff? Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Your Honor. So the additional 3 million would be covered over what length of time and by fees? It wouldn't be a special line item budget for that. It would be over a long length of time.
Yeah, 20 years, 2.5%.
Okay, and covered by fees.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And this is, was not necessarily in our facilities planning or was? It was anticipated? Yep. Okay. All right, no further questions. Open it up for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the item, step to the mic, state your name for the record, or raise your hand if you're online. Seeing no public comment, so I'll close that and look to council for a motion. Mr. Down.
Thank you, Your Honor. I move that we approve the issuance of Series 2026A bond and Series 2026B bond to fund the above described Tank 2 project.
Second.
Mr. Fisher, second, and thank you. Discussion on this item. Seeing no discussion, have a roll call vote.
Resolution number 6315.
Counselor Dowd,
Aye.
Counselor Waterman,
Aye.
Counselor Fisher,
Aye.
Counselor Leftridge,
Aye.
Counselor Walker,
Aye.
Counselor Gabrielle,
Aye.
Mayor Hunter.
Aye, motion carries. City manager report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I know at the last meeting, we did talk briefly about having MDT and their consultant talk about the Highway 93 North Access Plan. That is still, still working on that. Hopefully have them here at one of the next meetings coming up, but just the agendas didn't quite line up for a night meeting for them, so I am still working on that. Do have a work session on the land use plan next week, as well as a work session coming up on the land use plan after the council meeting here. I would say that I know there's been some questions about the status of the fire station associated with the EMS levy. The RFQ for that has gone out, so that'll start that process. And in regards to the resiliency grant, that did come out. We looked at a number of things. Obviously, funding is limited, whether, we also down at the wastewater treatment plant was down for quite some time. So, that's something that the city is going to have to look at in the future as well, because there's not enough power generation to run that entire facility, especially for as long as it was down. So we looked at a number of potential options for that and found that that was kind of the most appropriate method moving forward. But certainly just has did raise some alarms during that of, some areas where we're going to need some more redundancy. So certainly more conversations on that in the future.
Thank you. Council reports, start this way.
I don't have anything today.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing for me today.
Nothing for me.
No, sir.
I'm ready to go to the work session.
Yeah, I just have a few items, and yes, we'll be doing a work session, be kind of a lengthy night potentially. Couple of things. One, kind of model after Mr. Dowd's frequent comments on the consent agenda. There's a lot of items with spending a lot of money and kind of moving through as a consent agenda. And the reason for that is it's all stuff that was in our budget and just implementing that. So a lot of concern about that around water quality, but also the kind of impact on the city in terms of wanting to see development that comes into the city on our sewer system rather than encouraging development out in the county on septic systems. And so we did ask our health board representative to come in and give a presentation on that issue and explain, his support for it. He's declined that invitation, which is unfortunate. So I'd like to request a work session to discuss that, see if there's anything we want to do in terms of submitting a letter maybe to the county commissioners, if we can get that in before their vote, so we do have representation of what our perspective is on it, and also maybe talk about our representation on the health board, given some of these concerns. So if it's okay with council, we might tack that on to next week's work session as a item of conversation. Hopefully it won't go too long, but I know we got a lot on the agenda, but.
I'm supportive of the idea of just having a little bit of discussion about that, because I know, having served on the health board, how complicated that is. And some of those, so it'd be great to have a little bit of education of what that looks like. And I guess that part of it is I look at how our land use conversation, we've sort of hit on the same issues around floodplains that are outside of our jurisdiction, but I guess in the end of it all, it would be interesting in seeing, is there like a public education or something that can be done between the city and the county to educate people about septage, especially having gravity-fed sewers in floodplain areas That's where I'm more concerned about. Again, that sort of conversations where it is, but I also would like to learn more about the issue.
I agree. I guess I'd like to, it seems like we're missing something. Would our rep be in attendance at this meeting?
He'll be invited. He's
But
already been
he's-
invited and declined, but we'll invite him again for.
That
work
would seem
session.
important to see if we're missing something, right? But I'm for the discussion.
Yeah, and I should say in his decline, and I didn't ask, city manager asked him, he did say it's public record, so we can go and look at the public record if we were curious. I mean, that was the response, and I did watch the meeting, where, the recent meeting where it was discussed, so, I did follow up on that public record.
I think it's our job to have a discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we're adjourned and we'll move into the work session. We want to take a quick break? Yep, just a few minutes. Call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the March 2nd, 2026 City Council work session. We have one item on the agenda, the ongoing Kalispell Land Use Plan Draft Review. Mr. Nygren.
Yeah, as you stated, continuing discussion, and rather than delay, I'll just turn it over to PJ to kind of continue that discussion, go over some of the edits that were talked about last time, and as time allows, start to work through some more chapters. PJ.
Right. Well, thank you. As Jared mentioned, just kind of stepping through some of the changes that we had made based on the discussion last meeting. First one was in the Parks and Rec, which is kind of revising one of the earlier revisions. And what we did there, just kind of expanded some of the equitable access to include recreational programs was one of the comments that came through. Jumping down to page 89. There was a comment of being maybe a little too specific with what the 25 legislature did with tax rates and kind of broadening that out to things that potentially may happen in the future, while using that change in 25 as a good example of how that can impact the local economy. So, and then page 90, there was some discussion about this issue as far as the city development versus county development, and that the differences in some of the standards can kind of lead to potential incentives to develop in the county. So we kind of reworded this a little bit to be a little less specific again, in terms of a 50-50 result, but acknowledging that can create an incentive. So that was on page 90, and then 92. We added in work with local and state economic development organizations to kind of specify that a little bit more than just some of the federal ones that were out there. Going down to page 94, this is where we added in the opportunity zones. So we put in the map showing the opportunity zones, and then included some language in here about encouraging development within opportunity zones or other areas providing federal and/or state tax benefits, as well as appropriate development in TIF and TED districts.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. That got us down into the natural resources chapter 6. And then page 96, corrected that typo. 97 was adding pursuing opportunities to expand partnerships with community organizations relating to awareness of flood risks and education.
Yeah, jerk if I went backwards. No.
Page 100.
Can I just, on the environmental sensitive areas map? So I did reach out to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We talked about, wanting to hear from them if we were to include environmental sensitive area for the Sand Hill Crane habitat. They are interested in submitting a public comment to the city on that topic, and I believe they intend to provide a map. I'm thinking we'll probably receive that this week before next week's work session. I'm not certain for sure, but I'm thinking that's the timing. But assuming we receive that, and it does provide a more specific map from what we received earlier, I just want to see the council agreement in inserting that as an environmental sensitive area on the map. Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Hunter, what exactly are you trying to do with the Sand Hill Crane area and the 4,000 acres that goes along with that? What is your real goal here?
Well, you say that as if it's a somehow hidden thing or deceptive, but yeah.
But at first you said you weren't involved. Now you're very much involved. What is your goal?
Yeah, so I wasn't involved in drafting the comments from Flathead Land Trust. So that's to make that clear. But I obviously am interested in it. And so my initial thing was to keep it out of the growth area. But we heard from staff that we're not going to make, in this process, any changes to the boundaries of the growth area. That's kind of a bigger change than we're doing in this process. But there was also kind of a comment that one of the things that we could be doing is providing comment to the county when it's in our growth area, that when it comes in, that the county would receive comments from the city about developments that might happen, or if a development proposal comes to us, that we can consider the fact that it's crane habitat and there might be adjustments to the development proposal based on the crane habitat. Seems if we're going to be doing either of those two things, we should have in our growth plan something that identifies it as sensitive habitat so that we have a justification, a foundation on which to say to developments that are coming into us or developments that are coming into the county that we're concerned about this and we want to, maximize the potential to preserve this habitat.
Thank you for that. I'm a sandhill crane lover. Follow them, right? I go on searches for them up the Swan where they're nesting. But if we start this, what do we do about a grizzly bear corridor down a creek? What are we doing in identifying lands from the council perspective with any animal and or bird, in this case, a bird that has a license to be hunted? What are we trying to accomplish? And what's next?
Yeah, and so like grizzly bear, the riparian corridor, we do have riparian buffers, and I've talked about in the past about the importance of those riparian buffers for those travel corridors for wildlife, so I think we have some of that already, and we have mapped here riparian zones in our map, so we have that in this growth plan. And in terms of cranes being, it's not about, it's fine, they be hunted, but it's controlled, it's sustainable, but if you destroy their habitat, there's none to be hunted, right? So, or at least not enough of them. So, the importance, I've spoken, and I don't want to sidetrack us again on, we've talked about this a lot. The importance of it is that there's 400 of them that congregate in this area, and that's unique. And it's valuable for, our residents and visitors and everything else. So, I'll let you. Okay.
Well, I just want to respond to this. I think that from my perspective, when we look at this, what we're doing is just a really comprehensive statement of everything that's happening in the valley and within our growth area, right? And so what is very clear is that this is a habitat, right? That it's an important habitat. And as we've done with so many of the other maps of identifying important riparian habitat, just to be comprehensive about what that is. And so from my perspective, it's more of an identification, similar to how we've identified grizzly bear corridors inside of the growth plan, being able to just simply identify that as being an issue.
I appreciate that comment, but my concern is what we are labeling somebody's property as a private property rights issue for somebody that's farmed out there, busted their butt for 2-3 generations, and we come in as city government and label their area just because the Sandhill crane happened to like the land there. Would they not move to Church Slough or another area? That's what I've seen following them, is they actually like people. They kind of like people. So how do we identify an area and take that private property rights issue away and keep talking about it as a city council with no knowledge of? I appreciate your comment about getting additional information, but I don't think this is our role. I don't think it's our role to start expanding our identification of properties outside the city.
Go ahead.
I would say I would very much disagree. I think the Sandhill cranes are a community property. Our wildlife is something that we all cherish, and everything we do is about personal and private property. I mean, we constantly tell people what they can and cannot do with their property, right? They can't build a commercial in a residential zone. We tell them they can't put an industry in a residential zone, right? We constantly tell people what they can and cannot do with zoning. And we're not even trying to do that here yet. We're just trying to label it for future reference. And if somebody wants to decide, they would still have to go through that process to change it if they think it's deserving enough. But it is environmentally sensitive. I think it deserves the label. Whether we do anything about it ever, that's another question. But to me, it should be at least identified.
Okay, I'll stop.
So the issue that I have here is we're not talking about a piece of wilderness that is something that they're drawn to, right? They're drawn to the pothole lakes because of the lakes. They're also drawn there because of the fields that the farmers grow food in, and they go eat in the fields, when they're not at the lake. So even if, I just want to caution the council, because even if we were to label this as environmentally, protected area, even if there was a conservation easement that somebody purchased this whole area, it could drastically change because, if the farmer sells his fields, then it goes into conservation, and then nobody's growing the grain there anymore, so the birds aren't coming to eat the grain. So they might move somewhere else unintentionally because of the process that we're putting in place as well. I just, I want an entity that is knowledgeable about wildlife to label this as an environmentally protected area. And I'm glad that Fish and Game's stepping in and doing something, because that's the right avenue to go. Because then it's not just the city saying this is something that's environmentally of concern to us, it's the state, right? And I think that puts us in a much better position to, protect these birds in the future. But I also just want to skip by this and continue on, because I think we've talked to death at this point.
Yeah, let's.
Final statement, you want to protect something, the only way to do that is to purchase that. And I understand there's other things that can come with that, but for the city to start identifying land outside the city at this point is inappropriate, totally inappropriate. And I don't want to debate for an hour. I missed a meeting. I couldn't zoom in because it was sitting there spinning. But I just think, I caution you that this is totally stepping on private property rights big time. And if my family, and I grew up a farmer rancher, was told that we couldn't sell when my dad had 4 heart attacks and needed to sell his property because we had certain Swan Hill, it would be a nightmare for.
We're not telling anybody they can't sell.
If you
Nobody's ever mentioned that.
If you identify something as sensitive, you are zapping out a lot of potential cells.
I would disagree with that. But anyways, I would say that, just respond to a couple of things. One is, we already label plenty of things. We label things as 100-year floodplain. We label things as riparian habitat. We label things as elk habitat. We have maps in our plan that label all sorts of private land as things. This would just be one more on the top of, shallow groundwater, all sorts of things.
At a much different scale at 4,000 acres, sir.
Oh, I would say the floodplain and the shallow groundwater and stuff is probably bigger than that. But and then in terms of changing circumstances, this is a living document, as we've mentioned many times. We'll update it if at any point 400 cranes are no longer going out in this area because it's changed so dramatically. And then we can remove the environmental sensitive area label from that.
I swear this was your letter, Your Honor, not your co-workers. This was your letter.
No, I didn't. Listen, I work for the organization. I share the values, but I'm sorry that you are calling me a liar.
I'm not calling you a liar. You were part of it.
I did not participate in it.
At first,
I'm not going to argue about this, Mr. Fisher. You're out of line. You're calling me a liar. I'm not going to argue about.
You a liar.
Yeah, all right.
You said up front you weren't going to be involved in this.
No, what?
You said up front you weren't going to be involved in this.
No, I didn't. I said I didn't participate. I did not say that I was not going to participate in the discussions. I put on the record that I didn't participate in my organization's submission of the letter. And that's the honest truth. We'll go through, if each council member can state whether or not they support designated environmental sensitive area condition on Fish Wildlife Park submitting.
I support it.
Ms. Gabriel.
Boy, I'm not sure where I stand on the issue. I'm struggling with it because it is somebody else's property and they don't live in the city limits.
Mike?
Your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said I'm struggling with it because it's somebody else's private property that may or may not care about cranes. I don't know. But I agree with parts of Mr. Hunter as well, stating that we have lots of other labels on things. The problem I have is calling it that and including it in our plan when they're not in the city limits yet. I don't know, I'm all over the place on it. But I agree that we have to be very careful. And I would like to hear, I guess, what Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have to say about it, and continue it after that.
Thank you. Mr. Water.
So on this one, I mean, I guess my largest concern, again, we're talking about something that's in future land use. I mean, not even in city limits, not exactly even in our annexation zone. And I think, again, the first public comment was that we should remove it from the growth zone. I disagree with that. And then as far as like what we have seen and what staff has nicely pulled together, there's a lot of things that are around the pocket lakes, which are riparian habitat, and have comment in that. And I also appreciate that the staff has included just that a viewing shed is part of that. Because I think that that gives us grounds to have the conversation. I mean, I agree with the sense that if it's not being designated from the state, then we are navigating or making up rules ourselves. And again, I think that because this is outside of our annexation, unless I see more evidence, I don't see support of why we would do it, because again, it's not what the staff originally gathered or what was originally presented by the state.
So if the state submits a letter with a map, you would be supportive, but until then?
I would want to see the letter and review it and see where it is. But again, I don't see a reason to remove it from the growth area. And it's just not part of the package. And again, this has been a package that's been developed and gone through the planning board. And I mean, this has been a document that's been in works. And in my understanding and talking to people, their waterways, they have riparian habitat. And the staff has done another thing of citing the viewing area, which is out that way as well. Which again, I think keeping it in the plan is important. And if there's future development out there, that gives reason for comment from the city. So I think as is, I think we have enough justification to give comment if we pass the land use plan. So,
Mr. Leffridge.
Well, this got heated.
I'm not heated.
No, I just want to be really clear about how I'm viewing this, which is in 6.1, we have identification, 6.2, sorry, we have identification of all the different wildlife that exists in the Flathead Valley. And part of this plan is to figure out how, when we grow and as we grow, how we can live without destroying the thing that makes the Flathead Valley so wonderful to live in, which is being able to have access to this natural place that we live, right? And so we identified the sandhill cranes along with everything else that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and DEQ and everybody has identified as being in the Flathead, right? So we identified the sandhill cranes in 6.2, and I agree with it being in there. And so what I'm looking at is the map of important riparian wildlife habitat, which from my understanding is drawn from information provided by the DNRC, FWP, one of the acronyms. And if indeed they say, just as Foy's Lake is identified as important riparian habitat, obviously people are developing on Foy's Lake, right? People are developing inside of the 100-year floodplain. We look at this map in 6.2, there's no prohibition, on development there. It's just a matter of identification of that and taking that into consideration as we grow. If FWP comes in and says, hey, we believe that this is an important riparian habitat, should it be identified in the map? Should that be colored in? Yeah, I would be in support of that. But I just want to be clear what we're doing and what we're not. What we are doing is taking information from the state government and including it in our land use plan as an identification of a resource. What we're not doing is we're not taking private property and telling them how you can develop. That's not what we're doing. I am all in favor of private property rights, all in favor of putting pavers in your backyard, all in favor of being able to do what you can do on your property. But if it is a public resource, we need to talk about it. And that's what I'm in favor of doing.
First of all, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying what you said up front is you're not involved. I'm not calling you a liar, sir.
I said I was not involved in the letter coming to the council. So I'm telling
Okay.
you, go back and look at the meeting minutes,
I
at
will
the
do
video.
I think my comments have already been clear. I think this is outside our jurisdiction. If we start doing this, let's look 25 years down the road. Pretty soon, we're bumping up against Glacier National Park if this grows like many areas in the country. I mean, Palm Springs, Indio, the whole Coachella Valley. How far do we go and where do we stop our involvement and let the process take its place? Perhaps they can sell to somebody that wants to conserve the whole area, but we should not be identifying such as a council on something that's not even annexed at this time. Inappropriate. What about the frogs that were here? I mean, they've done things in different areas to identify other species. Where'd we miss the boat on all those? And why just the bird that I happen to love? I do. That's the problem here, is I really like these birds. But where do we stop this? Do we stop it with any animal, anything that comes up on a list? I just think it's inappropriate. I think it's identifying lands before it's time, before the city has a say. I'm all for listening to any report, but I think this is outside our jurisdiction completely and invades on private property rights big time, in my opinion.
Couple issues. The first one is whether or not it should be included in the growth plan. I think it's gonna stay there because it's already in there. Also, we can't designate anything as anything unless it's at least in our growth plan, right? So we couldn't do anything. I mean, I can't go say something in Sydney, Montana is protected or whatever, because that's not our purview. So it needs to be in the growth plan for us to do anything. Number one. Number two is I just want to see what FWP is going to do. If they're willing to designate this as environmentally sensitive area, that's fine. I would feel that this council designating it as that is going to have much less teeth, especially since A, it's in the county now, and B, it's private property now. So I just want to kind of wait and see what FWP comes back with. If they're not willing to, label this as an environmentally sensitive area, then I say we just, proceed as normal. Now, we always have the option, if we want to grow into that space, if somebody sells and has to be incorporated into the city, that, we can do something at that time. But if we don't let the state agencies step in and give their 2 cents, if they're willing to designate this, fine, and we can adopt that here on council, that's fine. It's just that, I am still a firm believer that it is not in the city's best interest to exclude this from the growth plan. I'm talking 2 separate issues. I'm waiting on FWP's report, see what they say on the whole issue encompassing, but as far as the growth plan, I'm adamant that we should keep it in there, because without it, we have nothing we can do with this area, or nothing we can designate. You can't save the cranes if you don't own the area, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
We don't own the area.
Well,
only the owner of that property owns the area.
I understand that 100%.
I understand that was a misnomer.
I'm talking future state if they were to sell and asked to be incorporated into the city.
Sure, property.
Yeah, and I'll just say, in terms of the slippery slope argument, we're not like if there's some frog or, the reason this is an issue is because there's 400 of them, and it's unique, not only for our area, but for the state of Montana and the Rocky Mountains outside of Colorado and New Mexico. So, but I apologize for bringing it, I brought it up before we received the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks letter, specifically because I was thinking this was the last meeting where we're really going to dive into and get changes to the document. And next week, potentially, we're just looking at those changes and then moving on. So I wanted to have that discussion, but it sounds like we still have folks who want to see the letter for sure first before making any commitment there. So we'll have to wait until we see that letter and potentially have another discussion on it. So we'll move on. Apologize for that distraction.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, next change that we had in here was on page 100. And that's where we just kind of corrected some of the things as far as conservation easements based on how they function. So we just basically dropped off the latter part of that. Page 108. Oops. We cleared up a little bit of a typo through there with the location of that aquifer area. And then running on to page 109, we added a paragraph on here about how we would use some of that depth to water table and taking that into account as we look at the appropriate zoning or the appropriate land use designation that we would give a property, and also looking at it with site-specific development.
And we already do that, we're just saying it now, right?
Yeah, we've done that, and there's some examples out there where we would have conditions on a plat that you couldn't do basements, it needed to be slab on grade. So yeah, that's something that we've done quite a while. So it's just essentially recognizing that, but being more explicit about it. Let's see here. Then it's up to 122. This is when we were talking about seismic and like adding in a distinction in there, because we had language in there about building permits review that new construction with the seismic requirements in mind, but some of those older buildings don't necessarily have that, so that would be something that we'd be recognizing as part of this.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Under air quality, this is kind of adding in that there can be other contributing factors to that besides vehicle emissions.
Oh, on that, so I did look back, because I had the comment about the wood burning smoke, and I knew I saw that somewhere, and I looked back and there was an article about it from 2009, which I acknowledge is a long time ago, but I haven't seen any information since, to my knowledge. But it did say at that time it was 70% of small particulate particles pollution during the winter months is from wood burning smoke. So I do think it deserves a little bit more treatment in here than saying there's other contributing factors. I think in the winter months for the small particulate matter, it's the main contributing factor. So I think it's worth just highlighting that, and not to diminish from the vehicle emissions and the importance of that obviously to pollution contribution, but I do think it's worth pulling out and mentioning.
Okay. Let's see, we're down at 132. This is where we made some of those changes, both on this page and the next one. Part of that was expanding this just from waterfowl to migrating birds, and then kind of working with some of the language throughout that paragraph to address that it's a route for many different species of migrating birds, not just waterfowl. But kept a lot of the language about how particularly waterfowl would relate to riparian areas and lakes and rivers and so forth. We did add in some of the language here about promoting viewing opportunities and utilizing potential partnerships for wildlife mapping efforts, and kind of kept that rather broad, but that was a factor that we had talked about at the last meeting, and incorporated that as well. So those were the changes that we had. Were there any questions on any of those? And I guess as a side note too, as we're kind of scrolling through some of these habitat maps, those were pulled off of the, there's a statewide database for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that our GIS people pulled that off of, that they kind of update over time. So that's where some of those changes came up. So this was the most current information that we got from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, which did lead to some subtle changes from the maps that we've been using from 2007, 2008. So.
Your Honor. Your Honor.
Yes, sorry.
Requesting to go back to Parks since I was zooming in and out for just a couple brief comments. PJ, could you take me to the brief mention of the need for indoor facilities in this valley
Yeah, let me get up there real
and
quick.
Parks and Recreation? I didn't write down my number of the section.
Right there, 4.
And is it 4 that you're talking about? That's the issue that calls out lack of year-round public indoor rec space.
Right. And again, my apologies that I couldn't stay connected to you all when you were reviewing this, and sorry to digress, Your Honor. Just the importance of this for me, and I think others, because I've talked to some on council and many in the public for a long career of 25 years running park, 33 years, weeds, parks, recreation, building maintenance. This valley has a serious case of the haves and have-nots. Those who get in a gymnasium, those who can afford to go to the summit or afford a private gymnasium. And it's not just children, it's adults too. And I really want to see, the county had set aside, we got to the point where I had $3.5 million set aside at one point for an indoor facility, but just hugely important as we continue to grow. My old verbiage was always keep them on a court before they're in a court, and this goes for adults and children. There's just a serious lack of things to do in our long winters, and summers are busy when the schools close down. They don't have janitors there, so the indoor facilities go away. I just really want to keep this as a priority. I know it all comes down to money. I know it all comes down to funding, but this is a public interest thing that keeps people active, healthy, and busy. And I just think it needs a little more of a highlight, because I know that there's people in our community that want to support and give. And I think it doesn't just need to be on, I don't want to see the senior citizen who doesn't use the facility having to pay. I would like to see another formula or something to keep this at a higher level, just because of the sheer lack of places. And again, everybody has always said I just made it about the children. It's adults too. I'd rather have them out being active than sitting behind a poker machine at a bar, right? It's just important. It's a lifestyle that then is passed on to our children. And I think just as many are interested about other things, this is of huge interest to me. And I want it to be more of a priority. And I know in the Parks and Recreation Plan, maybe we can do more there too, but it just seems like such a short PowerPoint punch for this. I just wanted to do that briefing of the importance of it for this community, especially as we gain potentially 15,000 more people. There's no place for them to go now, and it's just hugely important, and that's it for comments. I don't know if it's any additions requested to that, or if that's possible. I guess I just want to see if the council is open to grants, private donors, anything to make this happen for this valley, because we are falling seriously behind.
I would just say I can't agree with you more on this, both as having adult parents who need to recreate more, as well as young kids who don't have indoor facilities for them to go to in the wintertime. I think that this is a great thing, and I'm very excited to work with you on this. I do think that goal number 4 under that is one of the more specific things that we actually have in here, which is to design and construct a multifunctional community recreation center, either through public or private investment. I think it's actually pretty specific, and I think that it gives us the jumping off point to keep going on the parks plan and to kind of put together something. The only thing that I would maybe change in this is public and or private investment, just to kind of give the opportunity in order for some sort of joint collaboration between the city and private investment. But I fully intend to spend my time on council working with you and the rest of council to figure out a good option for our community.
I so appreciate that. And just a couple additional comments. Our pool at the summit is 1 inch shy of being an Olympic-sized pool. And that became the problem, is we want hockey. It became so cumbersome when we started dealing. I was just trying to get a gym built and then add on later. But we need hockey, we need swimming pools, Olympic size to be able to have events. We need to have something that can house and seat enough people to bring in a big tournament, even like Belgrade, Montana does. The Flathead Valley can't do it because we can't seat enough people. That's where costs go up so much. So maybe some lines have to be drawn, but the main thing is to keep people active, healthy in our community that we're responsible for dictating policy for. So I totally agree with you and look forward to working with you. And number 4 is hugely important. Maybe some additions or revisions to that. I don't know.
So I too am supportive of this. I mean, but again, this is the land use plan, so it might not be like, maybe there's some way to emphasize that this is something that definitely needs to be talked about in the Parks and Rec plan. Again, that this isn't necessarily the space to always do, but these goals do get referred to. Again, I think this is a way for somebody who's coming new to the area, looking for overviews. I want to make sure that there's seeds for that, but maybe there's just an indication that says the Parks and Recs plan is going to be sort of finalized and adopted, and that's where some of those comments would also be taken action with.
Yeah, we can certainly expand on what's in here, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, we've got one of the other plans that it's incorporated into this. You know, you can get into some of the nitty gritty. You know, it's implied certainly through here, and there's nothing.
Two places that you usually find wood burning stoves. You find two places that you usually find wood burning stoves. You find them in high-end, rich houses, you know, because they're rustic or whatever. But you find these a lot in the lower income because they supplement their heat with wood burning. Just putting a little bit of effort into it yourself, you can get the wood required for you to heat your home in the winter. So I'm really hesitant about us doing anything to detract from people having this as a choice for heating. But if we're going to just do it as an education point, that's fine.
Yeah, I think at this point, an education point is fine. I mean, I had mentioned like incentive programs or something, not for necessarily getting rid of them, but, there are cleaner versions out there, replacing an older version with a newer version that's cleaner. But that's, honestly, way down the road, if we were to ever go there. So, I'm just putting it as an education point at this point.
I'm just trying to get in front of this in case we're trying to deter them at all, because I know this is a big point with especially the people that live on the outskirts of our city that will be incorporated at some point, supplementing their heat in the winter with the wood burning stoves to keep their costs low. So I'm just very hesitant about making any moves there.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Is there anything else on the chapters that we've covered?
Thank you for going back.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
also have another time limit tonight, so I'm sorry. Yeah, I will join on Zoom as soon as I walk out of here. I don't control my son's schedule, unfortunately.
Okay. So that brings us up to chapter 7, which is future land use map. And future land use map is something that we've had incorporated into our growth policy for quite some time. We weren't proposing any changes with this. It's been updated a few different times over the last 6-7 years to address certain areas that have come up. Certainly can address those as we're going into the future. One reason we didn't get into changing the map per se is that you do kind of get more specific to people's property when you're looking at that land use map as opposed to some of the general policies that we would have out there. But we incorporated in here. It's the exact version that we've had up on the wall. And again, weren't any changes to that. A lot of how this chapter is laid out just really follows how MALUPA addresses it within the statute and certain things that you're supposed to address. One of the things that we did here, and these are all descriptions that are in our current growth policy, is looking at what these designations mean. Mostly what we did was just kind of consolidated these because they were kind of spread out a little bit through the growth policy before, but didn't really change anything substantively other than one item, which I'll get to in just a minute. But you can see where we've got a commercial designation, a neighborhood commercial designation where you're trying to create a little bit of that buffer, industrial, urban mixed use. and then you'd have the public, but then we'd have three categories of residential. You'd have the high density residential, which is when you're looking at the apartments, 20 or even more units per acre. Urban residential, which is up to 12, which also supports a apartment type use. Suburban residential was the main place that we made that change. Historically, it's been up to 4 units per acre, but it's also been based on 7,000 square foot lots. And over time, for the last 15 years or so, we've had 6,000 square foot lots. One of the housing strategies was go down to 4,500, which is really consistent with a lot of planned unit developments that we've done recently. So those numbers just didn't mesh up over time. The 4 units per acre is something we'd had since at least like the 80s or something like that in that designation, and it just didn't function anymore. So we bumped that up to 7 in the suburban residential, which meshes with the densities that we're seeing today and which would be part of what the housing strategy would be.
So before we move on, I have a number of comments on that 7.2 because it is, I understand we're not going to be making changes to the map at this point, but I do want to either have additions to kind of make sure we have the door open to discussing changes to these in the future. But the neighborhood commercial, so we have it at the distance spaced at 1/2 to 1 mile apart. And I know kind of a walking distance is 1/4 mile. So I'd like to see that move to a 1/4 mile. And obviously that is going to require, more planning on where that's going to be in terms of getting it on a map as opposed to what that map is. But I'd be interested in somewhere in the document talking about wanting to, have that process of discussing 1/4 mile space rather than.
I'd say kind of like 2 parts to that answer. One is I think the reason why it was 1/2 to 1 mile apart is because generally when you've looked at some of those nodes, and I'll kind of go up here real quick, where we've got these neighborhood business nodes kind of spread out at major intersections, those tend to be a mile apart as you're out there. They're not mid-block. So trying to focus some of that higher intensity out in these areas that traditionally and historically have otherwise been suburban residential, but kind of focusing that where the infrastructure is there at main intersections and to take advantage of that, as opposed to creating what would be more of like an urban mixed use type of a thing. So anyway, that's the reason behind that distance. I don't think it was random where they came up with that.
No.
And then as far as the changes, Chapter 8 gets into the implementation section, and one of the sub chapters in there talks about basically what we've talked about in here, where, if there's something that, the balance of the council wants to move forward as an amendment, or if there's a neighborhood that wants to move forward with an amendment, or even an individual property owner wants to move forward with an amendment, then those can kind of come up and be considered individually, as well as the text of it. So, if at some point the council wanted to go to 1/4 mile as opposed to 1/2 to full mile, that's something that could kind of come up as part of that amendment process, or down the road when there's a major update, either one. So,
Is there any opportunity at this point to put something in there about wanting to look to move towards 1/4 mile separation?
well, I think a lot of that's kind of up to the council. If you wanted to go in that direction, you could. I think that in a lot of ways, the way that is set, there's 2 different ways that it really comes up. And, one is, like we just discussed, where you'd have basically at these major intersections, when you're looking out in that rural area, tends to be, mile blocks where those major intersections are. And that's where it flows from. The other place that you would see neighborhood commercial is really as buffer areas within town. And you don't necessarily have that same distance requirement there. I think that distance requirement is really getting more at the those neighborhood buffers.
Well, I just think of like PUDs that come in if, we have seen like the one off between 2 mile and 3 mile that we've recently extended the PUD for. There was kind of a commercial corner built, and maybe it's on the map here as one of those spots, but even if it wasn't, that if it's a good opportunity to create a commercial center at a 1/4 mile distance, it creates a kind of 1/4 mile distance for a number of developments that we would say, yeah, this is a good place for kind of a concentrated little commercial node. And so even if it's not at the intersections we pre-identify, it might be within a PUD that comes in.
If it's within a half mile right now, are we denying those, or is it just happening with the CUP, or what happens today if they want to build a commercial zone within a half mile of another one?
So part of what you have to keep in mind with the land use plan is that any actions you take needs to be in substantial compliance. These aren't regulations per se. So if something is at 0.4 miles, you wouldn't say, oh, we're going to turn that down because it's not at 0.5 like it's called out in here. So there is some flexibility there to look at what a given situation is. You look at what your regulations are. You look at what makes sense on the ground, knowing that those B1 zones are really intended to be buffers between residential areas and commercial areas, so you don't have the high intensity commercial or industrial uses right next to residential uses. You also look at the other major points in the plan. You'd look at how the entirety of that land use plan comes together rather than an individual portion of that. So you could have a project that would be at a quarter mile that might make sense when you look at the entirety of it. You'd say, yeah, it's in substantial compliance. It wouldn't necessarily prohibit that, but that's not the typical situation that you would see it in.
Yeah, the whole land use theory in Montana is littered with this. It can't be within X number of miles or feet from something else, and it's ridiculous. I would love to see, you can put it in with your development, but it can only be, no more than 25% of the total development or something like that instead, and let people kind of figure out what makes sense for that neighborhood. Because you could have neighborhoods that are right next to each other, and but there's some geographical like a highway or something that goes through there that makes it natural to have them closer than a half mile.
Right. And the other issue with that too is that each one of these zones or each one of these designations are tied to the intent sections in the zoning ordinance. And so there would be different zones where you would say are appropriate within those designations. So the B1 is the neighborhood business zone. That's what you would really see with the neighborhood commercial land use designation. But you can do that and say urban mixed use too. So when you're looking at that map, it's not just these kind of pink nodes. They're not really pink on here, but they're on the other maps. But they're appropriate through all these blue areas too. And in the urban mixed use, it doesn't have that same separation. So what's calling out with these neighborhood commercial ones is kind of this little more specialized area that's out there. It wouldn't prohibit a B1 type of zone, which would be the exact same uses in any of these urban mixed use areas.
I mean, as it's written, there's not enough of those nodes even. Really, the way it's written, there would be one pretty much every section and they're not mapped that way. So putting a quarter mile wouldn't hurt. I would say if the quarter mile is not there and the development comes in and it's proposed with commercial, the public will come out and say it's not there. And then, so it gives council more flexibility in the future.
But they're only doing that because we put the stupid half mile or quarter mile thing in there in the first place,
Here's
right?
my question. Yeah.
It's a chicken and the egg thing.
This land use policy is supposed to be like the broadest policy we have, right? And then we get more specific as we get into like the zoning policies and subdivision policies and downtown plan. So I would be much more in favor of removing like as much specifics from this as we can. Any mentions of numbers should be found like in the detailed section, for example. Like we can give the broad outline of what we want the zone to look like or whatever up here, but the details of the zone I feel like should be in the detailed plan. And then you only have to go to one place to change it instead of 3 or 4
unless
places.
it's something that like the state puts in there, we have
If
no
it's
control.
state required,
Yeah.
sure, obviously those exempted.
No,
But
I'm with you on that one.
I think we should make it as broad as possible with our goals and policies, but the specifics we should leave to the specific documents so that we don't have to change it everywhere.
I just want to jump on that. I would agree generally with that. And I would say that part of the value here too is the educational component to develop. I mean, I feel like developers coming in, especially if they're out of state, they haven't developed in Kalispell before. They're one of the first things they're gonna do if they're I think, good developers, is they're gonna come and look at our growth plan and say, what does this county want us to build and how do they want us to build it? And so if we have mentioned, and it doesn't, I hear your point. I think, rather than talking about distances specifically, maybe we talk about, we want a mix of things that are walkable, of different uses and stuff. And then we get into the zoning about what those distances are, if we're putting distances on them. I think that makes sense. But the thing I was going to mention in some of the residential sections is just this idea of allowing for compatible small-scale businesses within our residential. So I see these kind of nodes as kind of a little bit higher intensity commercial zones where it's just have like a bigger concentration and a higher intensity commercial a little bit. And then within our residential though, we have these areas that pre-zoning in our historic neighborhoods had some commercial areas. We still have it on 6th Avenue East, where we have the Logan Health doctor's facilities. We had the cafe there at the 4-story brick old hospital. There's an antique store just up the block from there. On the north side of Flathead High School, there was an old commercial little shop that is no longer there, but nobody can move into that space now because the zoning doesn't allow it. But we used to have these kind of small scale compatible commercial stuff, and I want to make sure our zoning allows it as well. And, so I want to make sure this narrative, part of it, what I'm trying to get at is that we don't have to come back if we're making those changes, or we make them in the next process, in the zoning process, that we don't have to go, it says in our planning, our growth plan, that we're doing something different. So now we have to go back and open that process up again to change that. But, let's keep it either general enough or put some sort of reference that we're going to be looking at it so that we're not going backtracking and having open up this again. And
I'd feel better instead of it saying number of miles in between or whatever, just saying should be spaced appropriately. So, something really generic that we can then call into the zoning regulations to actually cover.
Yeah, pedestrian accessible and convenient to neighborhoods. Yeah,
I 100% agree. I mean, when my boys were little, we would walk down to Woodland, Florida to go fill up some balloons, half a block away. It's fantastic. But one of my questions, like for PJ, would be, let's say a PUD was going in the suburban residential area. Let's just talk about one of the developments theoretically that we approved tonight. And they wanted to come in and have a little section for, a cafe or, a dog store or something of the sort. I mean, would that be in substantial compliance?
It could be. And, that's part of it, especially when you're looking at PUDs, you are looking from deviations from what's in there. And part of it is you're looking at how that deviation would meet what the goals and policies are within the land use plan and within the regulations. So, you can certainly see something where, there's a smaller scale, coffee shop or something like that would be part of a layout like that. Anytime you're looking at at a PUD, you're looking at substantial compliance with what the growth policy says. So you can certainly see some areas where you might have a growth policy designation or a land use policy designation that might be urban mixed use, but the underlying zoning is really more commercial, and you can introduce that in. So it becomes site specific, and again, it goes back to this being a guiding document that you need to be in substantial compliance with. The scale of a PUD makes a difference. If you're looking at, you can have a PUD that's 2 acres. You might not want that in there, but if it's 200 acres, having a little neighborhood component there might make sense, especially if there's, proximity to, an arterial or a collector road or something like that would make sense. So, again, keeping in mind, this isn't a rigid regulation of what we're looking at here. It's just something to help your decisions when you actually do adopt regulations or do adopt zoning for a property.
Thanks, I appreciate that clarification, and I'm certainly in favor of these compatible uses mixed in with these residential areas. Certainly, putting a gas station and, a more heavily commercial type development inside of next to a bunch of apartment buildings wouldn't be appropriate. But, when we're talking about being able to walk to a corner store or walk to a flower shop or a cafe that's right down the block, I mean, I think that's what makes these communities and these neighborhoods that I personally love so much. No offense to your districts, but like the east side of Kalispell is fantastic because you have those opportunities. And I would love to see that be encouraged for future developments, to the extent that we can make it clear inside of this is where we would like to see and how we would like to see these developments grow. I think that I'm all in favor of that.
Mr. Fisher.
I agree, and I agree with you. We love going to Woodland Floral, even though it's out of my ward, to your coffee shop. I mean, that's what makes a neighborhood a neighborhood. It's just too bad some haven't been able to make it. It'd be nice to encourage that and let them be as big as they can be to attract business. I agree with you.
So it sounds like general agreement about just looking at this language, make sure there's nothing in there that kind of, is against kind of this idea of a little more flexibility on that business and neighborhood compatibility and proximity. The other item that stood out, and I have a few of them here, so I apologize.
Before you move,
Yeah.
can I add one thing on that? Just so the council's aware, we need enough of specificity that allows us to plan. So there's a balance there, right? Like when it comes to dwelling units and acre and things, when you're planning for water and sewer and street, like we have to have that to a certain extent, knowing that it is flexible up and down, but to a certain extent, we have to have the ability to have a bit of specificity to plan for stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, for example, the neighborhood commercial, we certainly can look at that, and it could just, you could literally just get out the language that says neighborhood commercial areas should generally be 3 to 5 acres in size and be spaced 1/2 mile apart. You get rid of that sentence and it's very general, so.
On the urban mixed use section, so as I read this, it kind of focuses on more location of, and obviously our map is doing that, but as we talked about at the beginning of this process, there's a desire by some at least to look at whether urban mixed use as kind of a general designation would be more broadly identified as for future development. And so I'm wondering if we can massage this language that so it's less focused on kind of location and more talk about walkability and traffic dispersal and housing diversity and kind of the values of that mixed use, and that it's a goal that I think widely is supported in terms of wanting to see more mixed use. And I just want to avoid kind of shoehorning it into specific locations when it could be more broadly deployed. Mr. Walker.
Just to add to that, I also don't think it needs to be high intensity. Like there's lower intensity uses of urban mixed use that I think would also be valuable to have in places where we don't necessarily want it to be super high intensity and high density, but still allow for mixed use in a lower intense environment.
Okay. And then the last one I have is the suburban residential. So again, I made this point at the beginning when we were talking about the map, and again, I know we're not making changes to the map, but I want to make sure that if we do make changes in future iteration, that we're not kind of reliant on language that is holding us back, I guess. But just this idea, we have suburban residential that is now down to 4,500 square foot lots, 7 dwelling units per acre. The state mandates that we allow ADUs and duplexes, and we're going to implement this, I think, maybe possibility with some other additions. And I think the impression the community and the public and even developers have of suburban residential, it no longer fits. It's just, I don't think that's what people imagine with suburban residential. So I think when we have this in there as kind of a designation with all the things that we're making it, it's a bit misrepresentative. So I know it's on the map and we're not changing the map, and so right now we're going to have that, but if we can put some sort of language in there that, whether it's here or somewhere else, just saying that we're going to be addressing that or looking at that in the future.
I see where the discord that you I see where the discord that you see, Your Honor, of we're using a term that makes it sound like we're talking about just suburban households, but by right and by so many of the changes, or even by the smaller, the number of 7 dwelling units per acre, it is getting denser. So it's not that classic use.
Right. So, I mean, it could be as simple as just changing it from calling it suburban residential to low-density residential to juxtapose against the high-density residential, that's the higher category. And then you're getting away from that term. I mean, is that?
I think it still is, I mean, if you have 4,500 square foot lots, 7 dwelling units per acre, and those lots have ADUs and they're duplexes or fourplexes or whatever, you're moving away from low density residential as well. It's not, 4-story apartment complexes, but a lot of people would say, yeah, ADU and a fourplex or duplex or whatever, and 7 units per acre is not low density residential anymore. So I just, and
Maybe intensity?
low
Intensity instead of density?
Yeah, I mean,
We can work on that.
We
Yeah,
can work
I
with something there, but
think
yeah,
that's
I mean, just remembering there's 3 categories and how you label them, and yeah, it's just a label anyway.
I mean, it's almost like urban residential 1 and urban residential 2. And it, I mean, that would be more appropriate rather than trying to stain by density or, something like that.
Okay. Anything else on those?
I don't think so. I will flag, I hate to do this, but before we finish, or at chapter 6, I had some comments. I won't do it now after we get through these chapters, but on the floodplain, it's back to just wanting to make sure we don't box ourselves in on some things. So in case I forget, I'll try to remember before we're done tonight to go back to chapter 6.
Okay. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, kind of following what Montana Code outlines in the, in MALUPA, kind of addressing that, and it's something that we've highlighted before, that it's a guiding document for council, planning commission, staff, and the public, and isn't regulatory. Part of what it calls out is looking at the geographic distribution of future land uses. And this kind of ties back to some of those housing projections that we had, where we were looking at, between 8,800 and 10,000 new dwelling units. So part of what MALUPA wants you to do is to make sure that you've got enough designations within your land use plan to be able to support that in the future, and to provide areas for growth and have the ability to support that. And we've kind of talked before about how the overall planning area for Kalispell has got 3 subparts. The inner circle is the city limits, the next ring out is the annexation boundary, and then the planning jurisdiction around that. So we kind of took those 3 subparts and kind of broke that down, looking at, land within city limits, that, it's about 8,500 acres, and kind of broke that down by the existing land use designations. Did the same thing within the annexation boundary and land within planning area. So you can kind of see where that steps up, but there's, currently within city limits, a lot more, and I'll use the current terms, urban residential in there. You get out into some of those outer areas and you see a lot more of that suburban residential as what makes up the planning jurisdiction as opposed to within the city limits. But anyway, that's why those are in there, is because that's a required component of MALUPA, is to make that analysis. You're also supposed to look at the impact of covenants and homeowners restrictions out there. City does not do anything as far as enforcement, interpretation, or anything with covenants. The only thing we really get involved with is if there's a subdivision, we'd want to make sure that common elements like stormwater or homeowners parks are maintained, because if not, then the city has to step in. So we want to make sure that those provisions there. And by and large, because homeowners associations or covenants can be adopted as private covenants that don't allow ADUs or might have larger lot sizes than we'd have, zoning doesn't trump those. That can have an impact on your hypothetical total number of housing units that you can develop throughout the jurisdiction. But I don't think there's any one particular area in the city that's more impacted than others with that. And that's part of the analysis that we're supposed to do as well. also supposed to call out areas of increased growth pressure, and this is something that we've kind of talked about before, but I was going to go back to this map real quick. And that what we call out in that section is that there's a real rational reason why we see so much growth pressure to the north and to the west, with Lone Pine Park running through here, with the river and the floodplain in Evergreen. We've got the narrow corridor that you can grow down. Of course, there's some infill that could happen, but in terms of really growth and expansion of the city, it really is pushed from this area straight north off over here to the west and right through that corridor. Just because of topography, built environment, the fact there's the bypass and west side interceptor that runs around the west side of town. But again, that's what we called out in that specific section to identify areas of growth pressure.
So PJ, I just had a quick question. Recognizing that most of that area where we're growing is identified as suburban residential or low density residential, or name yet to be determined, are we able to meet our projections in terms of being able to put the number of units, recognizing most of that area is this low intensity development?
Yeah, even with that, we didn't put it in here because it got super complex and hypothetical, but we'd blow the top off of it if you hypothetically develop the whole area. Part of that is what we've talked about with the number of units that we already have entitled. We're looking at a 20-year housing projection that would be 8,800 to 10,000. We have 5,000 sitting there entitled that people need to pull together financing and whatever else on, and there's definitely plenty of area that would be available for somebody to develop for housing. So it still needs, of course, to meet market forces. You need to have a developer that's willing to do it. You need to have financing rates that make it acceptable to make that kind of investment. But when we stepped through and did all of the analysis and breakdown, we certainly have a lot of areas that we provide for that, and we've got the facility plans to support the growth that might happen in that area.
Great, thanks.
And that was through chapter 7. The last two chapters are really implementation and incorporating what your existing neighborhood plans are and area plans are. So in terms of implementation, it calls out zoning regulations. It's something we've already taken through with the public hearing on, and would come to city council after we get the land use plan up there. But zoning regulations, and really everything that you're looking at here is what do you need to do to bring your regulations in line with what your land use plan is. And certainly with the zoning regulations, there's some things under MLUPA. There's some separate bills that have been passed by the legislature, bringing it in line with city code. It does outline an implementation strategy, but next thing I really kind of wanted to get into with that was the housing strategies. And so one of the
Before we jump there, is with the implementation strategy, I don't know where I saw it. I don't have it jotted down in my notes, but maybe it's not in there. But just in terms of the minimum lot size, I know we're going down to 4,500 square feet on lot sizes, which I think is great. But I'm wondering I've heard people discuss kind of courtyard developments, which I've seen. We have some on the west side of downtown that are really great, and I've seen these, and they're coming back kind of in fashion. They're really neat style developments where houses are oriented inward to a shared common kind of space. It's not like a parkland. It's more like a shared yard for, say, half a dozen homes or something like that as courtyard development. And when I think about kind of lot size, a part of it, you have your home site, but then you have your yard space, and we want single family homes to have some yard, and so that's partly why you might have a minimum lot size to make sure that you have some yard space to go with a home. But in case of a courtyard type development, I could see where you just have the lot is just the house, right? And maybe it's even a tiny home house. And then you have the shared courtyard space that's not the lot. And so I'm wondering if we could put into our, and again, it's moving towards zoning code, but maybe we put something in here as reference that we'll look at it or do it or whatever, that says, when it comes to courtyard, we eliminate the minimum lot size, or we move it down to 800 square feet, or, size of like a tiny home lot development.
Right, and we currently allow those right now. We've seen a number of those that have come through, and actually back in chapter 7 here, it kind of talked about patio. People use different terms for that, patio homes or cottage homes. I think usually most developers have called them like cottage homes. But the Mountain View out on Foy's Lake has incorporated that. Vista Ridge Condos used a lot of those. I think there's just one project that Habitat was working on that will probably incorporate a lot of that. So we allow it right now. It's typically done through a PUD because it's not just a lot size issue, and we've allowed those to shrink down quite a bit. So, it's through the PUD you can drop below those minimum lot sizes. And then you incorporate some of that open spaces. You're looking at the overall density in that situation as opposed to per lot density. But you're also looking at deviations from public works requirements and so forth, which is why it's really hard to get away from the PUD process of approving that. But those have gone through, and I don't think that there's been any hiccups in those moving through. So they're presently allowed for. It's just that's the process we use.
Let's say you had, an existing developed neighborhood, but you have an undeveloped, or maybe even you have a developed, but there wants to be redevelopment, let's say a couple lots or something, and you're going to put in like tiny homes and with a courtyard shared space. Like that would be too small for a PUD, or would it? Could they come in for a PUD for 6, tiny homes on a lot in an existing developed neighborhood?
No, I mean, usually when you're talking about that with the PUD, usually it's one block is kind of the minimum lot size that you're looking at, because otherwise you get into a spot zoning argument if you change it just for like one lot on a block, right?
But if we allowed it kind of anywhere in any of our residential zones, that this is something we could allow.
So that's where the growth policy and neighborhood compatibility comes into play. So typically, if you're gonna do that, you should have more than just a lot. At least typically that's the way cities do it. You don't, that's the idea behind spot zoning as well. Certainly council could do that, but for the most part, like even downtown, if somebody were able, think of Eastside Brick, it's a block. It's an entire block, 600 feet by 600 feet. You're not talking about one 7,000 square foot lot. So whether it was the east side or the west side, if someone were able to acquire a half a block or a block, then certainly it would be eligible for a PUD and to do something like that. But the way it's written right now, remember, zoning's there to protect property owners as well. Protect what they bought into and what their investment was. So that's the balance you have. So yeah, the way it is now, you wouldn't be able to do a PUD on one lot. I think it says 5 acres or something, 2 for residential and
2, yeah, and it depends upon the type of PUD. If they're 2 to 5 acres, but the other thing I would say is that really the only place that you'd have a real issue with that would be our main, would have been traditionally single family neighborhoods. If it's a zone, an RA zone, RA1 zone, and we've got a lot of those that are out there, you can do multifamily projects on those, and somebody could lay that out with having cottage homes if they want to. They don't have to do it in one fourplex building. They could do 4 individual ones. Building department would look at a single family under IRC, and we would just review it as an apartment. So I think that there's options for that. Maybe not everywhere in town, but there's definitely options for that out there. And if you can get enough land together, you could pretty much do it anywhere where residential would be allowed just through the PUD. So I think it's provided for pretty expansively.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that, because I would hate to, with some small, development, have somebody go through a PUD process, which is intended for kind of a much bigger project for something like this. And maybe, I'm going to talk about form-based zoning as a future goal. And I think that might address some of this where we're less concerned about, the issue of the number of lots and multifamily versus whatever, and more kind of that compatibility question. So yeah, I just want to flag that as something that I would like to see us change on our approach to make it easier to do something like that without having to go through a PUD in some neighborhoods. So the reference to somewhere in here, let's see, I think it's 8.1. There's a reference to CUPs. And I'm just wondering, because we did have the discussion around the warming center issue about the possibility of, maybe doing away with CUPs and just writing into code more kind of general regulation about the concerns we have with different uses in the CUPs. I'm, not necessarily, saying that's the direction we want to go, but we did talk about that as a possibility in the future. And so again, want to make sure, if there's anything that we want to maybe reference in here to open that door of future conversations about adjusting our CUP or eliminating our CUP regulations.
And I think part of it is you kind of have to see how some of this stuff plays out too, especially with how the legislature is approaching things. And yeah, there was some discussion about if you're not having a public hearing, what's the point of having a CUP? But at the same time, even if it goes to staff, it's just reviewed administratively. And right now we've got a number of administrative CUPs that don't have a public hearing anyway. It just essentially broadens that category. The way that MALUPA is written now, you're still sending out a notice for a written public comment. So it's not a public hearing, but you're still providing that notice ahead of time and trying to bring in some of that comment. And it still gives the city as a whole some discretion. So even though city council wouldn't be weighed in on it, if it's something that really doesn't make sense, staff would still have discretion to condition it or deny it based on what the circumstances are. And then both the neighborhood and the developer would have the right to appeal that up to the planning commission and up to city council. So I think what you would see by leaving the CUPs in there is you kind of can address, most of those situations would be handled administratively. Some of the more difficult ones may come up. You wouldn't see them as often, but they would still be, right now in our zoning ordinance, we weren't having any changes with that other than what the notice provision is under state law for it. So it'd still be the same criteria you'd be looking at. You'd still have the same standard conditions that would get attached, and it'd still be the same uses. In the long run, we may see that differently. And part of it, like again, right now, we don't know how the state Supreme Court's coming down on these notice provisions. We don't know how the legislature is responding to it, other than the fact that we know that they adopted a whole set of notice rules that self-terminate 14 months from now. And then who knows where it's going. So it's really in a state of flux. And that's one reason why we just kind of left it as is in zoning.
Yeah, and for me, the issue is not the process of whether it comes to council or it goes to staff or administrative review. My thought coming out of that warming center discussion is stepping back even further and just saying, because there was an example of, with bars, we have, an issue where we want to look at, the impacts before we approve it and stuff. My issue is that there's a common theme, right? It's like the noise of what's going in and, the hours of operation or something like that. And if those are the issues we can write in potentially, I'm not necessarily sold on this, but I just think it's a possibility that instead of a CUP process, you would just write in the kind of the nuisance standards that say, anything that goes in there, whether it's a bar or a homeless shelter or anything else, these are the things that you have to comply with. And my point being, because when I had lived next to a single family home, and they were, the example was we want to review bars before they go into, next to a neighborhood, because there might be fights at 2 in the morning. Well, I live next to a single family home and there were fights at 2 in the morning in the lawn. And so the issue wasn't whether it was a bar or a single family home. It was that there were fights happening outside the facility at 2 a.m. in the morning. So we would, instead of having CUPs over what the use is, we would have regulations about what the impacts are on the property regardless of what the use is. So that's where I just, wanted to see if we could have language to make sure that conversation is open for the future.
Couple of things that we did add in here from what had been on the books was updating the zoning ordinance to implement at least 5 of the housing strategies. If you recall, that's one of the core aspects of MALUPA is picking those. And that kind of jumps us down into the housing strategy section. And Planning Commission did spend quite a bit of time. There was a couple work sessions specific on that. A lot of our community outreach was really based around which one of these strategies is the community comfortable with. So I think there was a lot that went into determining these strategies, and they actually picked 8 of them. Some of them because we already do it, some of them because they'd be fairly easy to do, and some of them because we're kind of mandated to do it anyway, like the parking one. But just kind of stepping through these, allowing as a permitted use a duplex anywhere where a single unit dwelling is permitted, so really no true single family zoning as part of that, which is really essentially what we do now. For the last 5 years or whatever, we've had ADUs everywhere but R2 and R3 zones, which are kind of your older established single family zones. So it's not as big of a change as you would necessarily think. Allowing as permitted use an internal or detached accessory dwelling unit, so it's kind of related to number 1, but they're a little different because this number 1 is a single building with 2 units in it. Number 2 on here is allowing that detached accessory, but both of them would be allowing 2 dwelling units on the same property. So they're kind of related that way. Number 3 was zoning for higher density near transit stations, place of employment, higher education, like the college, other population centers. And we actually do this because we don't really have any density requirements in our business zones. So where you would see places like Hutton Ranch, for example, we don't have any maximum densities if somebody wanted to put an apartment building in there. So I already do that for the most part. The reduction in parking spaces, there wasn't a lot of public support for this, but there was a legislative bill that requires us to do this by October of this year, so we can count it as one of the housing strategies. We're going to have to do it in any case, but that's eliminating or reducing parking requirements to no more than 1 per dwelling unit. What's actually in the state bill is it kind of has this breaking point. There's a number of things as far as daycares and assisted living facilities too. Looking at most dwelling units, there's a break at 1,200 square feet. And if it's less than 1,200 square feet, you can't require any parking for it. If it's over 1,200 square feet, you can require 1 parking space for it. I think as a practical matter, you're going to see people providing parking spaces, even though right now we require between 1 and 1.5 per unit for an apartment complex. Almost everything we see is coming in at 2. And it's important to note that state law does not allow us to put a maximum on. So somebody's free to do as much as they want. We just can't require any more than what these minimums are. So that's why that was included in there.
So on parking requirements, I do want to propose that we eliminate minimum parking requirements for commercial development, partly because, and this is, when it comes to commercial specifically, historically, there's no basis on kind of how we come up with the amount of parking allowed for commercial developments in terms of, there's some great videos online about this, about how, we say a restaurant, you can have so many parking spaces per square foot or whatever, and there's no basis. It's just somebody came up with it at one point a long time ago, and then it got copied from one zoning code to the next. Parking is expensive. And we know through extensive research that we overbuild parking in this country. We have way more than we need for off-street parking. And so that expense gets passed on to people with those buildings who's buying into it or whatever. And it spreads out communities, makes it difficult to have more walkable communities. There's impacts from just in terms of the underutilized space, it being a barrier to more housing and so forth. And I did note from the presentation today that apparently there's public support for reducing the parking for more housing, I think, as well. So I would like to expand this. I understand that, and I'm fine with kind of that one space per housing unit, residential, but actually expand this to eliminate commercial minimum mandatory parking. And that's to say that it doesn't mean that there won't be. It's just leaving it up to the developer to decide how much they need. I know at this point we do have them continuing to build over our minimum. I think there, at some point education that will need to occur that understand that a lot of this parking is overbuilt. But anyways, I wanted to get thoughts from council on that because that's something that really important to me that we move towards.
You want to eliminate parking requirements, period, for all commercial?
Yes, minimums. So they can still build, but it'd be up to the developer to determine how much parking they need.
So I can build a grocery store and not have any parking?
I mean,
You could, it might be a failed grocery store, but it would, the developer would, there'd be no reason for a developer to do that, but.
I think if we lived in a community that wasn't winter for 8 months out of the year, that might be more realistic than where we currently live.
This is council discussion. Again, we're not saying there's not going to be parking. So, I want to move past the idea that we're going to wind up with no parking from a grocery store. The idea is that these minimums aren't based on anything. They were originated at some point a long time ago, and they've been copied from city code to city code over decades. And so you allow the flexibility to determine what the best amount is for the developer. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Your Honor. I see your point. But having built 2 major parking lots and fighting Susie and the city the whole time, the South Campus and the Earl Bennett building, I thought they're predicting too much. I'm having to do too many inputs. The drainage pond, everything that goes along with it. I would have done anything to build smaller, but they're full every day now. So I think there's some good rationale behind the city's recommendation or desire for, and certainly up to private business, but I don't know if we got into that, if it would make for a lot of success. I like some standard, and any projection could see if you're building a grocery store, you need 500 parking spots. And like I say, coming from experience, 2 major ones on Main Street, they're full every day, but I thought they were too big. Wanted to save money. Everybody's gonna wanna save money up front. So they're going to shortchange it. People aren't going to have room. There's going to be no handicap spots. We have to think of those folks because they're going to be shrunk up. So I guess I see your point, and I see sprawling. I see further distance, but I think the standards have proven to be quite successful, and at least what I got from the city and what I've seen in other lots, parking lots throughout the city.
I'm for eliminating minimums. I don't think we should be telling businesses how many parking lots or how many parking spaces they need to put in. If they want to put in too few and fail, that's up to them. I think it's the free country. Like if they want to put in too many and have half of them be empty, that's also a waste of space in a free country, and they're allowed to do that too. But I don't think we should be forcing somebody who doesn't want to put in parking spaces to put in parking spaces, especially if their business they don't think they're going to need them. Like if they're going to have foot traffic or they're not in an area that gets a lot of cars, they shouldn't have to find a way to shoehorn in parking spaces just to be legal. Like I just don't think they should have to do that. And I mean, I know it gets cold here, but I mean, lots of places get cold. Lots of places handle the winter just fine. Like we're Montans, right? My neighbor shovels in a tank top, push their snow. So I think we can handle some cold weather.
I'm actually for nerfing all zoning, so go ahead. I think it should be up to the developer, the owner, the private property owner to figure out what they need. You know, the minimums, you know, the people that are creating these businesses know what they're gonna be needing, you know, to sustain their business. And, you know, oftentimes they put in a lot of parking and they even need more. You know, we find out just because, you know, Costco is a great example. I don't think they expected when they created this Costco that they were gonna get so much business from Canada, right? So they actually have quite a few parking spaces that, I mean, if you look at their new place, they put in like double, right? I'm all for letting the business decide, or the you know, whoever's creating the space, the private property owner, decide what they need. But I also don't think that it belongs in this document. I think it belongs in our zoning, when we talk about that piece. This, you know, if you want to create a general guideline that you want to surface here, that's fine, but I don't think we should get into anything that's that specific in this document.
Yeah, I bring it up because you know, we already have it in there. Obviously, that's responding to the state legislation. But if we are commenting on parking minimums, I feel we should, you know, cover everything. If we're going to remove it, we should have it in there, or, you know, or we're removing the specific reference here. But I want to hear from if Mr. Leffridge or Waterman have any thoughts.
There's no doubt that I think we overbuild parking. As we're also talking about some of this mixed-use development and, you know, small commercial zones inside of residential developments. You know, obviously, if you're walking to your local coffee shop that's a couple blocks away, you know, you don't necessarily need to plan for all of the development being car-driven, or all of the business being car-driven. I'm certainly into. There's just no. I appreciate your perspective. It is a good one, and you know, I trust the city has rationale for what they do. So I'm into reviewing this and kind of understanding what the city's rationale is and how we can make changes, especially as we're kind of envisioning the future.
There's a couple things I wanted to throw in on that too. So, you know, first of all, it's important to understand that the section that we're in here is about housing strategies, and that's where it's coming down. It's about, it's not intended to be in here for general parking or general commercial. It's about how do you generate more housing units out there in order to meet those numbers that we're seeing. And that's why it's one of the listed strategies in MALUPA, but tied to housing. And that's why the language in here is specific to that. And then when you look at the, there were some tweaks that went along with that legislative bill about overall parking too, and when you have change of uses and not requiring additional parking, because sometimes people would get into a change of use and have additional parking that would be required to change the use in the building, so you wouldn't be able to do that either. That's incorporated into the zoning ordinance updates as well. So the zoning side of things expands it a little bit. This is more targeted towards how do we generate the housing that we would need with that. As far as some of those numbers, yeah, I mean, somebody did a study at some point as to what was out there. I would say that, you know, in the time that I've been here, there's been a couple times we've dramatically reduced the amount of parking for different uses by, you know, anywhere from 30 to 70%, depending upon the use. We eliminated parking downtown. We dropped it by 50% in the B3 to kind of create a redevelopment incentive there. So a lot of our commercial areas already have substantial reductions beyond that. In some of the neighborhood areas, we've got the special parking district that allows for reduction in parking numbers, so you're not, you know, so somebody wants to put something in like a church, they're not necessarily needing to buy 3 houses next to it and tear down and put in a parking lot. So, you know, we have some provisions that are already built into zoning for that. And I think, you know, honestly, like a lot of things, it's always a balance too. I mean, you see, you know, some of the outrage over around the high school because everybody was parking there because there was enough parking on site. We have a lot of people that come in with projects and don't want to pay for the parking, but have really good ideas of what they'd put in. But you would see 30 or 40, 50 cars lining the streets, and then we'd be fielding all the complaints from the neighborhood too. So I mean, there's good arguments on both sides and there's a balance, but I did kind of want to get in here that this is part of the housing strategy part of it, and that's why it was focused on the dwelling units as opposed to the broader question that you had with that, which is certainly something that could come up as part of the zoning ordinance discussion.
But anything over 4 units is considered a commercial development, right? So a multifamily that's.
Not in terms of what this is, in terms of that, it's based on the amount of parking per dwelling unit. So you're right, we look at it as a commercial project, it's commercial building code, but when you're looking at the parking standards, it's considered residential in terms of number of residential dwelling units, and that's how you calculate it out, so.
Oh, okay. All right. And one thing I do want to point out is that if we had minimum parking standards, our historic Main Street would not exist.
So, I mean, I'm much more in Mr. Dowd's point of view, that this isn't necessarily the right section or the document. In zoning, I could see the conversation happening. I sort of think, PJ, you sort of echoed that as well, that we're right now talking about the housing strategies. I can see the conversation fitting into a zoning conversation.
I mean, these are directly tied to the thing, the state said pick 7.
Yeah.
And these are our 7. That's exactly what these things are.
Yeah, there's 5 that you were to pick, and then this one happened to align with a bill. So Malupa came in 23. There was a 25 bill that was really specific on this, that forces cities to get there anyway. My understanding is the reason they had, because usually when it's, say, spring of 25, you'd have October of 25 as an effective date. They specifically put October of 26, so cities could use this as a housing strategy as part of it. So it meshes up well with what we have to do anyway, which is why it was in there. But again, it was targeted towards the housing and the housing strategies of Malupa. So.
I know it's getting late.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, I'm not finished here. So, I'm still open to or interested in eliminating minimum parking requirements for the multifamily. Above, I understand the concern in like residential neighborhoods, people don't, and having 1 unit or 1 space per unit in a residential zone where we're talking single family. I mean, personally, I'd be okay with eliminating it there too, but, I know folks feel strongly about that in their neighborhoods, but for multifamily that's going, higher density multifamily that's going along our Parkline Trail or these areas, to allow the developer to put in what they think. I think about the June Grass development, and they got a lot of kind of reductions because they put in a bike thing and different things, and so they were, I think, below our minimum.
If I could interject there, so if you recall what this bill says and what we're putting in the zoning is that 1,200 square feet is that threshold. So if you've got a 20-unit building, or 24 is what we typically see, and they're 800 square foot units or 900 square foot units, there will not be parking required with that. So it should be apartment units 1,200 square feet and larger would have 1 required with them. Okay. So I think what you're asking for is already in there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I was not aware of that distinction. Okay. So moving on.
And the defense on that is when you get complaints, the state did it, because you will get complaints. Parking is gonna be an issue. I know, just saying that's built into state law now. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about it, but it's now the state telling the cities that they have to do that. So.
Right, but it's the ceiling, not the floor. In other words, right. Like we could eliminate it. They're just saying you can't require more than that. But anyways, I'm fine. We'll move on from that decision. The other one I wanted on this, and this specifically gets to the housing strategies, is the one I feel that's missing out of the options, is allowing the 4 units in residential zones. Again, I've mentioned this many times, but I live on the historic east side. Next door to me is a 4-plex. I'm realizing that when I say 4-plex, a lot of people think 4 townhomes side by side. When I think of 4-plex, I'm thinking a stacked 2 units below, 2 units above, a staircase in the middle that accesses it. So I have a 4-plex right next to me. It used to be a single-family home, got converted sometime, long time ago before zoning. And if you came to my street, looked at the house, if you didn't know it was fourplex and you didn't notice the mailboxes, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was fourplex. I've lived there for over a decade. It's never been a problem. We saw from the presentation, public comment, there's support, majority support for this from the polling that they did. So I want to include the 4 units in our residential zoning as one of the strategies that the state legislature provided the option for.
So one comment on that too is, again, like I noted, a lot of what our public outreach was based on, including our website, was people making comments and voting on that. Different polls would have different things, but it wasn't very supported through any of the comments that we got. People were very comfortable in having ADUs and a duplex. When you started talking about fourplexes, that comfort level dropped pretty significantly, was what we got from public comment through our processes. So that's not to dispute the validity of that, or that there are people that would support it. But certainly seeing that and knowing that, they only really needed to adopt 5 of these through the Planning Commission, and they went ahead and adopted 8. They didn't feel like they needed to get to things that they weren't getting that level of support of from there. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
So thoughts on that, including that option as one of our strategies?
I mean, I'm generally in favor of infill. I mean, when we're talking about looking at being able to have more density inside of our neighborhoods, being able to create incentives for developers, say, to turn one of the East Side mansions into a fourplex, for example, that should be an option. I agree with the mayor's assessment that there's a lot of places on the east side and the west side, for that matter, that are fourplexes and triplexes that you probably don't even know because it doesn't look like it. It just happens to be a big house that doesn't have a lot of cars parked around it. It's not a big apartment building, but it is a use that is integrated into our neighborhoods. And I think that at times the aversion to that idea is that it seems like it would be a massive development, like an apartment building going up next to your house. I don't think that's the reality in actual practice. So if we do want infill inside of our town, I'm generally in favor of allowing for that.
I think this is real close to the same sentiment I have with the downtown plan. I like the plan. The people don't want it. And, I look at the survey results. The survey pool was like 600 and some people, which is 2% of our population in Kalispell. So I don't know if that's an accurate reading of, just how, I'd like to take a look more into those stats. I just think that the survey group was kind of small, but, I'm basing this just on my experience of sitting up here for 2 terms. Anytime we start talking about forced density, right? We really get a lot of kickback from the people of Kalispell. So I like the idea. I just don't think that it's. I don't feel comfortable putting it forth just because I don't think that at least the people of Ward 4, I think, would be pretty ticked off if we work this in kind of against their will. That's just my comment on it.
I will say I do believe 600 represented in a survey is considered an adequate number in my knowledge of.
Did you say inadequate?
No,
Would be adequate. In my knowledge of survey and polling, that
2%'s big.
Yeah, 2%. It's actually quite big, but yeah.
That's
typical
disturbing.
polling, but
2%, if you surveyed 2% of the US, it'd be like 60 million people.
the value in it is the randomness of it.
Yeah.
If you had, anyways, I don't want to get into.
So,
but
regardless of surveys, I mean, I guess this is one of those where, and again, those of us who have been in historic Ward 3, I mean, before zoning, yes, fourplexes were allowed. Zoning came in and said that you couldn't have them. So that's why historic west side, east side Kalispell has fourplexes in our zones. Is because before zoning, it was by right and what people were doing. I guess the one thing where I don't agree with you, Mr. Dowd, on this one is that we're not forcing it into everywhere. One, HOAs would never allow a fourplex to happen. So there's a lot of subdivisions in a lot of areas that want to do it. It would be a by right issue. Somebody bought a property and wanted to have the option to do fourplex on. In that sense, I mean, it's like that landowner has the right to do what they want to do with their property. Don't see a reason to zone it out because of that.
Well, could
Because
they do it?
You're not able to force those into HOAs, I guess.
They could do it today with a CUP, right?
And we don't really have HOAs in the city. I mean, it's not gonna apply to
In the city, we do have HOAs.
We have some.
All our new,
Well,
all our new developments.
Newer subdivisions, you
But
would,
not-
you wouldn't older part of
not
town.
Ward 3 or.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, the difference is that in Ward 3, we really don't have
No.
very many HOAs. Again, originally plotted,
Right.
the true Townstead plot, an individual property owner was able to do whatever they want. As
Yeah.
Mr. Hunter pointed out, somebody could put a grocery store in half of their lot. And I mean, there used to be neighborhood grocery stores. There also used to be subdivisions and stuff like that. So that's why, again, in historic downtown, you do see these fourplexes somewhere around the 50s and 60s. We end up having zoning that zoned them out. And again, this is where I would say, if somebody wants to develop it that way, I wouldn't want to say they couldn't.
So really, we're talking free enterprise.
Yes.
One thing I
That's
want
my
to,
opinion on this one, and I would agree in the sense that when we're saying you can't do it, then we're taking away a right of a property owner to do something that they would like to do in their development. Or it
one
could
thing
be
I feel like I
development.
always have to remind people is, did zoning come in place because of that? You can't forget that. I think that's part of the story, is maybe zoning got put in place because that was happening. So I think it's important to remember that as well, because zoning was a very controversial thing when it got approved.
I would say
by
that's a
the-
big can of worms to open, because there's a lot of reasons why zoning got implemented.
Okay, I'm just telling
that's
you,
ugly.
I'm
I
just,
appreciate
I'm
that.
just
Thank
telling,
you
I
very
mean, I think
Thank you,
it's
Mr.
very
Dyer.
important to,
Yeah.
you can forget, and it's certainly time goes on, but it was there to protect private property rights as well, and that was part of it. So certainly fourplexes is something we looked at, considered, council can consider it, but I think we can't lose sight of maybe things aren't that way because there was downsides to it as well that council can certainly consider, so.
Thank you for the feedback.
I agree. And if somebody buys their place in that neighborhood expecting a certain quality of life or a certain zoning, that's what they'll purchase into, and to switch that back and forth or what have you, there's a reason for, I agree with you 100%.
Again, but I will point out, the survey did talk about kind of that preserving the neighborhood character and whether, prioritize housing over that, and the results was that the housing was more important.
If I hear from 6,000 people instead of 600, I'll consider it.
I haven't seen, that is not what we heard in the public. And we've been in local, I'm not gonna question it, but we've done a lot of our own public outreach as well, and that's not what we saw at all. So I just want council to be aware, you may have a survey, but your own planners here in the city of Kalispell who have been all over the city and held public meetings and stakeholder meetings, it's not the stats that we're seeing, just so council's aware.
And I think one thing to look at too is if you look at some of the frustration maybe with that ADU discussion about adding a second dwelling unit on the property as opposed to 4. And like I said, I think people are starting to get used to the idea of 2 there, but yeah, I would agree. Everything we've seen through this is that people are seeing 2 as a comfort level in some of the older areas. And again, if you're in a residential apartment zone, you can get those additional ones. And I think that was always one of the discussions about, having the R2 and the R3 and the R4 as distinct zones from the residential apartment zones, is because people didn't want necessarily to have apartments everywhere. But again, that's something you can look at, and that is certainly something that council can look at more closely with that. But, we do have a lot of the feedback as part of the packet that we sent forth to council that you could look at as part of the surveys that we did, as well as off of our website, and you know, as well as the outreach that we did at some of those pop-up events and so forth. It was, in my mind, it was pretty clear where the line was there.
And I just want to point out, you know, one of the things that we know from research is that the people who participate in public outreach and stuff tend to be wealthier. They tend to be property owners, and so on. A survey that's calling randomly people is going to be much more diverse. They're going to reach the people who aren't property owners, aren't wealthier, aren't as, you know, don't have, you know, the education and so forth. So this is, you could argue that this is actually more reflective of real public opinion than the folks who would show up through, you know, the open houses and the events we've hold because of that distinction.
But the events that we, and just to clarify too, you know, the events that we did, it wasn't just open houses in here. I mean, we went to Sykes and met people at breakfast there. We went to Bias and met people there. It was at Thursday Fest and we met people there. It was people that came up to the fair. It was college. So we tried to get a diverse mix of what was coming through there, and I thought it was pretty consistent with what we got.
You know,
with that.
I know we have differences of opinion here, which is fine. I happen to disagree that I don't think that is an accurate number. And when I fall into that category, when I think that way with something that we're doing here in council, I'm like, if you really want to know, put it on the ballot. Let the people decide, right? And, you know, if they're for it, great. We'll go and change this document as soon as they approve or disapprove it. It's, you know, I think this is an important enough change that we should get more input from, you know, the people that put us up here. So anyway, every time we get into a discussion like this and we kind of get bogged down with, I think this is the right number. I think this is the right number. I'm like, hey, just forget about all that. Just put it on the ballot. Let the people decide. If they want 4, great. You know, I'm actually for it. I love the whole pad split thing where you can buy a house, split it into 4 sections and have 4 units in there. I love that. Right. But it shouldn't, I think it's, you know, not as palatable as we're being led to believe tonight anyway. But, and that's just my own opinion, but I'd love to, like, instead of, you know, getting kind of bogged down here, if we're going to have a disagreement on this, it's not a tough thing to get it on the ballot. And then we'll find out for sure. And then we can change the document immediately when we get the results.
I don't know that we've ever put zoning regulations on the ballot, but unless there's anything else, I heard a majority from those tonight to include it. So we can put it in, and then we get to the council meeting. If we have a motion to remove or something like that, we can proceed on the future.
So what did we agree to?
Including 4plexes in residential zones as allowed use.
Okay, I didn't agree to that. I don't, did the majority agree to it? Am I the only one that didn't?
No, I think there's at least 3 against.
3-3, and you have 2 council members
Not here.
not here.
Yeah. You know,
We'll provide language and then, yeah.
what I would hate to do is have this one sentence in here that makes me reject the entire plan, right, when we go to vote on it. So, anyway, I'm just trying to avoid that situation. It also is something that we can definitely dig into deeper when we get into the zoning thing. I would also ask if you like this and if you want to move forward with it, is this where you want to put it in our housing strategy, you know, area? But anyway, I'll let it go. Look at the language. I'll probably have a problem with it, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah. I think it is the appropriate place because it is one of the options that the state legislature provided to us, and this is where we're listing the options we are choosing. Okay.
Others housing strategies, we're allowing for single room occupancies, which is basically where you would have, you know, a shared kitchen and living room, and you'd have individual rooms off of that. Essentially allow that now. It's basically roommates. And so we don't break down single family by everybody having a blood quantum. Reducing minimum lot sizes by at least 25%. We kind of carried that through in the zoning. allowing for tiny homes. Building department would have to bring something forward because Appendix Q isn't adopted by the state, but it's an optional one that we can adopt. So if this is a housing strategy that goes through, there'll be an amendment to our local.
I thought that we already had those available and ready to go today.
For zoning, yes. It says there's nothing in zoning that would prohibit that, but the way that the building codes work is that essentially exactly what the state adopts is what the local jurisdictions have to adopt. But there are a handful of optional ones that local jurisdictions can adopt if they choose to. And this Appendix Q is one of those. And essentially where all it does is there's, minimum room dimensions that you would typically have with the house that just mathematically don't work on a tiny home. And so it makes some of those adjustments that come through. So,
Doesn't it allow smaller than 400 square feet? I think
yeah, and
what
that's
it is.
important too is,
So our building code now, you can go down to 400, which we've never had somebody even consider that size, but this would allow you to even go smaller than that.
yeah,
This is through the state.
yeah,
I've lived in one. Let's do it.
yeah, yeah.
It was smaller.
So yeah, tiny homes, I mean, it's just like we've had people come through and call things tiny homes, but they're like 700-800 square feet. They're not by code tiny homes, but this was something people were comfortable with. You would probably see it as ADUs. You probably wouldn't see it as a primary residence. But anyway, that was one that people liked. And then allowing multi-unit dwellings and mixed use as permitted use on lots where office, retail, and commercial are primary uses. So basically, this was taking out the conditional use permit requirement for multifamily. Similar type of section here in subdivision regulations. We had the subdivision implementation strategies. For the most part, what these subdivision, I've been working on these last week, but it's pretty much just incorporating the new MALUPA standards, which really changes your subdivision regs quite a bit. But that's part of the implementation strategy that we would have here under the land use plan, is getting those subdivision regs under MALUPA and being compliant with that. Getting into the next sections, you're really looking at land use plan amendments and updates by the city. So how we would initiate that. We've kind of talked about that here if there was something that came up where we wanted to go back and and look at that. Also ways that could be done by petition from individual property owners or neighborhoods, and what the process is as you're taking that through. Kind of a similar thing to this would be neighborhood area and issue plans. So this would be like the West Valley plan, or our annexation policy would be an issue plan. And this kind of outlines the process that you would go through in order to do that. Of course, we have an extension of services plan that's really heavily tied to public works and how we would extend services into new areas that we would annex. Also tied to that, capital improvement and facilities plans. We talked before about how all the different facilities plans, water, sewer, transportation, parks plan, are incorporated into the land use plan. But this kind of calls out, that we would be doing that. Capital improvement plans are tied in with those facilities plans. So that's something that you guys will actually be looking at later on this spring as some of those updates are brought forward. Urban renewal districts is certainly something that we would want to encourage, and this kind of just describes what's out there in terms of the different TIF districts we'd have, and that being an option.
Just a question, and I mean, when it comes down to, when we talk about tax increment financing districts, throughout the document, it's not as consistent. Like, we go back and forth between a couple, this is tax increment finance districts. State code calls them tax improvement districts. Is there, I mean, it just seemed a little inconsistent.
Oh, you'll often see TIFD,
I mean, like,
TIFD or TIF. Yeah,
just a note that I would have is that throughout the document, we keep talking about these tax increment districts. It's not always listed the same way, but the MCA definitely lists out how the state lists it, which is tax improvement districts.
Okay.
Just if somebody's going through with an editorial eye and wants to catch those, they might want to look at those.
Okay. And then the loop also talks about other plan studies, reports, things that might not necessarily call out now, but there's certain other reports that we may want to add into this in the future to expand out and to incorporate in. And that's really as far as the implementation section. The last chapter that we would have is neighborhood area and issue plans. And it's really important to understand here that what MALUPA says, you take all of your existing neighborhood plans and issue plans, and you need to incorporate those into the land use plan. It's also important to note that because those are standalone plans, that we can't really amend any of these right now. If we wanted to amend one, then we would have to go through the process of, say, amending the, the West Valley plan, or amending the annexation policy, or amending the downtown plan. We wouldn't be able to do it as part of the process we're doing right now. So that's how MALUPA lays that out. If people wanted to get into amending those, we can. It's just not in this context and what's here. This is more of just recognizing that there are existing plans that are adopted out there. And just so that you're aware, the plans that we have, there's the Highway 93 North Area Plan.
Sorry, Mr. Leffridge, did you have?
I just want to be clear, or I guess my question is, all of the issues, policies, goals that are laid out here are directly from those specific plans, or at least derived from those plans, is that right?
Do you mean throughout the rest of the document, or specific into this Chapter 9?
Specifically in Chapter 9.
So Chapter 9 is just verbatim what is on the books is attached here as a plan as directed by MALUPA.
Okay.
So we didn't change anything when it came to there, and we really can't, again, without going through and doing that as a neighborhood plan process. So,
got it. Thank you.
But yeah, I just wanted to step through real quick just for context. We've got the 93 North Area Plan. There's the 93 South Corridor Area Plan. Kalispell West Neighborhood Plan, which is West Valley. Core Area Plan, the Downtown Plan, and the Annexation Policy, as well as the Main Street Safety Action Plan. And that takes us to the end.
So I have a question that gets tied up into the process of amending these plans. So with a lot of what I've been talking about tonight, and I appreciate everybody's patience with, I know I throw these bombs and get a lot of conversation going, but partly it's from my experience in the past where I've made a proposal and it says, well, the response was, well, this isn't the right time, we do it at this later time. And then at that later time, I bring up that proposal and I say, well, we can't make that proposal because we have to change this other thing, the thing that I commented on previously. And I got very frustrated by that because it happened a few times in the past at council. And so I want to make sure that we have the flexibility in this so that some of these bigger discussions, if we move forward, we're not saying, well, we can't do that right now because we have to go back and do a whole different process with the land use plan first. And then, of course, that's a big process. And so you don't have time, so you push it off till later, and then it never happens, right? So that's a number of things we've been dealing with today. But on this, I've talked about the entrance corridors and the setbacks. I don't want to resolve that issue. I know that's a whole thing that there's a lot of debate about, but I want to maybe neutralize the language in here because there's several references where it talks about wide setbacks in the entrance corridor. Not saying we're not going to do that, but I just want to remove the reference to it so that if we do that at the future point, we don't have to come back and open up the land use plan to remove reference to it and say that we can't do it, part of the zoning change, because right now it's consistent with the land use plan. We have to change the land use plan before we can change the zoning, right? And I know it's in the highway plans, so we'd have to change those. But, so I had the question about process and order, if we can neutralize the language in the core of the plan to remove the reference so that when we go to the zoning, we can do it then and not have to backtrack and reopen this process.
So, well, I think with the entrance corridor standards, for example, where most of that is in those neighborhood plans. It's in the Highway 93 North and South plans. And like I just mentioned, you really can't make that change now. You can't go in and change that. You need to do that as part of a neighborhood plan process and amend it that way. So I don't think that you can really avoid that. I think that a lot of the language that's through here, you know, you don't need something necessarily in the land use plan that says, oh, you shall do X, as long as there's enough called out in that plan as far as identifying issues and broad goals where you can say it's substantially compliant with that plan. So depending upon what it is that somebody wants to do, you could be looking at doing, and we've done this in the past, say like a zoning ordinance update. You know, we did a pretty significant one in 2008 where we significantly reduced parking, you know, changed around different things. We added in, you know, our dark sky ordinance. We didn't have to go back and make changes to the land use plan before we did that because they'd be consistent with things that we called out, or at least substantially consistent. What you don't want is something that's directly in conflict with it. And that's the points that you'd have to go back.
It's in the core of the growth plan.
Yeah,
Leave it for the highway plans.
I think some of the things are, so if you're talking about, say, like the Highway North Corridor Plan, for example, because that's just like the facilities plans that's incorporated in. So what you'll see with facilities plans over time is that, you know, we incorporate it by reference, so it's part of what the land use plan is. And then when Public Works undertakes an update to those, what they would do then is, you know, work that through their process. They'd be doing work sessions with council, but the way it gets adopted and incorporated is just exactly what we were doing tonight. There would be a resolution of intent and a public hearing, and then an action item at the following meeting to incorporate into that plan. And so, you know, like the situation here, if you were to go in and amend the North Corridor Plan, the South Corridor Plan, and then incorporate those into the main document is probably the way that you'd go about that in terms of process. Whether you touched anything on the text within the land use plan, you'd still have to do that because they're incorporated through Chapter 9, so you'd have to do that step anyway, and you would probably just clean up whatever language it is to make that consistent with what those plans are. So it's part of the process that you would need to do, and I don't think there's any way you can necessarily get around that for something that's specifically called out like those neighborhood plans are. And again, if it's something that's broader, it's substantial compliance and guidance on what's coming in. You know, if you're talking about parking, for example, you don't necessarily need to put something in the land use plan that says we shall eliminate commercial parking. If that's consistent, say, with your economic policies and looking at, you know, there's a lot of things here that are fairly broad in terms of trying to have, you know, creative regulations that allow industry to thrive and allow commercial entities to thrive. So, you know, again, it just kind of depends upon what it specifically you're trying to do and how that fits in.
Do you have a specific section that you're thinking about that, other than what's called out in the actual neighborhood plans?
Yeah, there was a couple work sessions ago, I did flag. There was a section somewhere earlier where there was a reference to wide setback in the corridor areas. It was up, you know.
I guess that sounds like more, that was staff referencing that plan, describing the plan, not as a guiding statement unto itself. Is that what it sounds like?
No, I mean, and just to be clear, we're talking about entrance corridor standards right now, right?
Yep.
And so I think the main places you see that, and just before we jump up to that, well, a lot of what you would see within the South Corridor map specifically calls out, you know, the entrance corridor standards as part of that. You can see his issues here, entrance corridors, but it spells out that way. Almost all of the north plan, yeah, and you can see here it's like it's talking about extra setbacks and buffering on 93 North and US 2. When you're looking at the north area plan, probably half of that north area plan is about entrance corridor standards. So, you know, if you were to get away from that, you'd be dramatically changing what that north area plan is. But yeah, I think it was in our economic section,
just to be clear, there's nothing that prohibits us from modifying any of these neighborhood plans based upon what's inside of this land use plan, right? I mean, we can go back and make those modifications.
They would
And since
supersede
this incorporates it,
Yeah,
it would it would be like
has
a
to be
form
sub-
amendment almost.
Right, there's a lot of court cases that say you need to be substantially compliant. You can't piecemeal, so you can't have your land use ordinance say one thing and have a neighborhood plan, or your land use plan say one thing and then the neighborhood plan say something completely different that are conflicting with that particularly. And that's where you have to go through and incorporate an updated neighborhood plan anyway. You would just clean up whatever language, if that's the direction that you wanted to go within the land use plan, at the same time that you incorporate the new neighborhood plan. So I don't think it adds all that much there. You're going through that process anyway. It's just adding a little bit more to what's going on with it. But
Thanks for answering that procedural question.
yeah, sure.
So I guess, just to flag, similar, thing, just to flag it for the future. So, and this was what I missed last time in chapter 6.1.3, third paragraph, and 6.3.3 references 100-year floodplain, says that, we allow development in 100-year floodplain. At some point, I want to have that conversation and look at whether that policy makes sense to allow development. And I'm talking specifically about currently undeveloped 100-year floodplain, not 100-year floodplain that already has, lots of development in it. But, so, I guess at that point, we'd come back and remove these references there.
You could look at that and I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind with any of the things that we talk about here is one, especially with floodplain, it's basically what the city does is it flows from the federal regulation to the state and then the state to us as to what's there. And it clearly allows development in the floodplain is what that standard is. I think the other aspect that you have to be careful about is if you prohibit development on property, then is that a taking, right? And so you don't want to necessarily step into regulatory takings, which is why most of these type of things have safety valves out there, right? Where you can develop in the floodplain so you maintain the economically viable use of the property, but you have to elevate it 2 feet above base flood elevation.
Yeah.
Entrance corridor standards are the same thing. River setbacks are kind of the same thing, is that if you don't do that, then you wind up buying the property.
So, just we can be stricter than federal or state regulations if we so choose. And the takings, as I understand it, is that you can't eliminate use on a property. But if you zone, and we have this at the county, 40-acre ag zoning, right? So you're allowed kind of basically one, you can't subdivide, right? And that eliminates certain development use of that property. Under the argument that if we somehow limit, development in a 100-year floodplain as takings, then 40-acre ag zoning would be a takings as well, because you can't fully develop and use that property as subdividing and multifamily and so on. The issue where you'd have a takings is if somebody owned property that is only 100-year floodplain, and then potentially. But if you have some 100-year floodplain and some not, you could absolutely say you can't develop in the 100-year floodplain. The development has to occur outside of the 100-year floodplain and protect that 100-year floodplain. And it wouldn't be a zoning, just like,
And to a substantial degree, that's what we do, because our subdivision regs don't let you subdivide the floodplain area. So if you take that 40 acres, somebody could, and say it was half in and half out. If somebody wanted to just build something up front and keep it all as one parcel, they could do that and stay out of the floodplain. They could get a floodplain development permit and put a house on fill if they want to get it, say, back closer to the river or something like that.
That's a part I'm opposed to.
Right, but that's what's specifically allowed pretty much anywhere where you've got. I don't know of any communities that just ban it in the floodplain. What you would typically see with that, if somebody had 40 acres, they'd want to do a subdivision, right? They're not talking about just where we're putting one house on those 40 acres. And what we would typically see people do is that's where you would have your homeowner's park or your stormwater or something like that. We put it into common area, and then the developable area is what you wind up subdividing as part of that. And sometimes you even see that with some density shifting through a PUD or something along those lines. But I think a lot of what you're talking about is already built into our regulations. Just not to the extent
Not
of
if
not
you can
allowing
put fill in a 100-year floodplain and build on it, on a lot.
consistent
It's
with
not.
that. That'd be the one difference. But I think, but a lot of what you're saying, my point was a lot of what you're saying was there. But yes, that's typically there, and that's what the federal regulations are built around.
Yeah, I'd be willing to have that conversation because it does feel kind of like a gotcha. I mean, we list off what, 7 different benefits to the floodplain, and a fill eliminates all of them, right? If you fill it up, all those benefits go away. And are we keeping track of how much floodplain we're eliminating with fill?
Well, one of the
FEMA hasn't been great about that in the past.
No, but one of the important things to understand with how they develop those maps too, and it's sometimes we talk about floodplain like the flood's going to come to the 100-year and stop there because, like we talked about before, it could go 500-year, it could be a lot less. That's where the regulation line is, and that's pretty much a national standard with where you would regulate something to. When they establish that, and people use the terms interchangeably with floodplain. It's there's the floodway and then the floodway fringe that comes out, right? And so the regulations are built around the floodway being something you absolutely don't build in. And the floodway fringe, which we usually talk about as the floodplain, is places that you can put fill. So you can't fill typically all the way up to a creek or a stream in a situation like that. Where they establish where the floodway is you can fill the entire floodplain, and that would generate a 6-inch rise behind it if everybody filled out everything, which is pretty unusual and unlikely. So the amount of fill that goes into these areas is having a very minimal and marginal effect on some of the things that you might be concerned about with filling in that area. But the regulations are designed around having that no more than 6-inch rise if everything else was filled around that. So to some degree, that concern is built into the federal regulations that, again, we wind up adopting and enforcing.
Yeah, I think all of those examples you gave are takings. The Egg 40 go away, all of that stuff. Anything that you can't subdivide. But, the other thing is a lot of this is self-regulating by the free market because you end up having a really costly flood insurance bill. For some of these areas. Now, obviously, we're talking about putting the fill in and it eliminating the problems with it being in the fringe. That's kind of a, I understand the argument that if you displace part of the fringe, then that water, when the flood happens, goes somewhere else, right? But I would be very careful about increasing regulation that's city only, that doesn't derive from some other higher level environment agency kind of pushing it down to us, because you're kind of putting the city at risk then, right? And that's something that, to Doug's credit, when he was here, was something that he just slammed us with for the first couple of years that we were on council, So I hear that and I'm going, oh, this could put us into a position. Now, obviously, we can take another look at this, but I don't have any strong feeling about changing what we have right now in here. I would need to hear some pretty compelling information to make me change my mind.
Okay.
And it's a lot harder to rain on your parade if now that you're in that seat. I'm trying really hard.
Yeah. No, I appreciate. I know I tax your patience, but it's in my nature. Yeah. Are we? Anything else?
Now we hit the end there. So unless there's any other comments or anything, I think that the plan moving forward, just to kind of recap where we're at with that, is that, we try to get some of these changes incorporated in. I think that was scheduled, Jared, right, for next week. That would set us up for that public hearing that we set on the 16th, then with an action date again for that first meeting in April. So we do have those, just kind of expand on that a little bit. As I mentioned, we've got the zoning ordinance went through a public hearing with Planning Commission. And again, that's kind of sitting there waiting to come in the latter part of April. Subdivision regulations, they're doing a public hearing on that at Planning Commission next Tuesday on the 10th. And then we would bring those through together after the land use plan. And if we stay on target, then we'll make our deadline. So.
And just to be super clear about what we're doing next week is we're looking at the changes that we requested tonight to this document. And then that other issue that you brought up that you wanted to talk about at the next planning meeting. And that's the whole planning meeting next week, or is there other stuff on the? Okay. It is. I'm just.
It'll be the entire, at that point, there'll be pretty much the council have gone through at that point, the council have gone through the entire document and then track change the whole thing. So if there's anything else at that point, that would be the time moving into, public hearings and such, so.
And then we decided on the septic issue on
Yeah, next week.
next week.
I'm fine if we can get the information together in time.
I don't have any information on that. I'm not gonna be providing anything on that.
We're just
I mean,
inviting our,
Yeah, I
our
mean,
representative to the
I'll
board
call
to-
Rod again and see if he wants to come. He could choose not to. Like I said, it's been going on for 18 months. The city doesn't get involved in county business. I'm not following their agenda or what they're doing in regards to this, just like I'm sure they're not following city council agendas on a weekly basis. So certainly I'll invite Rod again and see if he wants to come say why he voted one way or another, but I'm not in a position to make him vote one way or another, and, so.
And we do have a precedence. We weighed in with the county previously on the housing grant question. So we have a precedence of
I
weighing in.
think it's fine. I just, I'm just trying to wrap my head around exactly what the issue is, and I got a fuzzy about what it is, but I need to know more details.
I mean, what's the issue?
Do we want to get
No.
into that now? Yeah, we'll wait until
Next week.
Yeah,
I-
we can talk
I'd like
about
to know specifically more about exactly why this is a controversial subject. I do understand that it has to do with septic and they're loosening some regulations on them, but I don't know exactly what's happening, so I look forward to hearing more next week.
Great. Open up for public comment. I know it's late, but step to the mic, state your name, or raise the hand if you're online. No? All right, close public comment. Any final thoughts from council?
My only thing is I'd like to reference some public comment from earlier. I would like to know what, other than asphalt or cement, what that third item refers to. What, I can think of some things off the top of my head, but I'd like to know what we find, like an example of something that might fit into a third category of something other than those two items.
Right. So where that regulation comes from, just in terms of background, is actually something that was referenced in here under air quality, where it talked about in the early 90s, the EPA came in, we were a non-attainment area for dust particulates, and we were required, well, there's a lot of things that they could have done, and the easiest thing was to require that any new parking spaces or driveways needed to be paved. And that could be asphalt or concrete. At one point in time, because people wanted to do like really nice pavers, but they weren't asphalt or concrete, so we did that. It's not intended to open it up to some of the things that we've seen over the years with people wanting just like the two strips coming in, or some of those cinder block kind of things that are mostly open. And you can make arguments about storm drainage and some of the benefits that come along with that. but that wasn't what we were required to do with the EPA. And that's why we've got the paving requirement that's out there. But we did add in that because, if somebody did really nice, like stone pavers or something like that, that was a solid surface for a 9x20 parking area, we would accept that, but we haven't gone further than that.
Yeah, I can think of like hempcrete is another, would be another acceptable substance. Recycled rubber that they make into like those really thick hard mats might be something that could be considered.
Potentially,
I just,
yeah.
I guess I don't understand the issue enough to see what he wanted and what we're not allowing, but I can get with you this, if the rest of the council doesn't care, I can just get with the city manager and figure it out. Okay.
I care as well. I have at my house the two strips and then the grass in the middle. And it's
I actually really like those like open block with the dirt and the grass in it. Yeah. But
and also
anyway.
the years ago I brought up the idea of permeable pavement. This is pavement that allows for water to percolate through to the ground soil, and I raised that in discussion with Public Works is that it doesn't hold up in the wintertime. And I've heard contradictory information. I believe Bozeman is allowing this, so I'm a little bit not unsure whether that if we can't maybe do something like that. And so it's something I'm interested in exploring someday.
Yeah.
And that's why I was going to share with the individual is that like I'd like to look into that too someday.
Yeah, I'd like to look into it too. There's a lot of substances that are more modern today that actually do a better job. I mentioned hempcrete because it's as strong as concrete, but it expands and contracts better with cold and hot. So it wouldn't crack as much. So, there's a lot of substances out there that we could use. I guess maybe I probably should understand exactly what we're not allowing with this one to be able to put my head around the issue. But I think there's a lot of things that could fit into that third category.
Certainly,
Yeah.
dust is the primary reason.
It is, and generally we've looked at those in a case by case as they come in, and that's one reason why we added that kind of catch-all category is because things can change over time. But a lot of them that we've seen wouldn't necessarily knock that down, and so, yeah, I don't know specifically what he was proposing or what the issue was with that, but it is something that we look at kind of on a case by case basis with specifically what somebody's proposing. But what we want it to be is to be comparable to asphalt or concrete in terms of the dust issue particularly.
Okay.
Well, and I think durability is the second question.
Durability
Because
is
if you have a
important
new
too, 'cause-
development in, you put something in, and 2 years later, it's totally falling apart, that's an issue too.
So there's some issues with that, and the issue is brought up about the permeable thing, kind of gets into the storm drainage thing a little bit more than what the dust particulate thing would be. But I have heard that discussion with some commercial parking lots and some of the issues that come up with the amount of maintenance that's required with vacuuming those out, and how, like, even compared to Bozeman, they don't have as much grit on the roads as we do here. So I'd leave that up to Public Works to debate that part of it, but yeah, there are different issues that come with that. But anyway, that's in broad terms what that zoning provision's for and where it came from.
Okay. So we are pretty flexible with that. It's just that in this case, I guess we didn't like the proposal.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't know specifically what his proposal was with that.
And it's okay. I'm not looking for that. I just would love to have an open enough mind that we could use some more modern, alternative to concrete or asphalt.
100%.
Agreed.
Glass.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, and there's recycled glass that people use in lieu of gravel. And we've seen people promote that product too.
Well, sand is just like small glass, right?
All right, we're adjourned.
I can't do this again, right?